Okay, welcome everybody to our special meeting of council for the E-Town Hall budget for Monday, January 29th in the City Hall Council Chambers. Council, you can see before you we have a few additional items. So that's under consideration where, as far as our inclusion in our budget is concerned. First, I'd like to express to Council, Councillor Minion's regret. She's not able to be here this evening. She's stuck on the wrong side of Sutton Pass. And secondly, I would like to recognize that we are doing our business this evening on the unceded traditional territory of the Sishat and Hupatchessit First Nations. Council, we do have the three late items, which you can see would go under C 3.1, C5, and C6. A motion to adopt the agenda with the inclusion of the late items would be in order.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Council, we have minutes from the special meetings the council held January 15th at 6 p.m. A motion to adopt those minutes, please.
I'll make that motion.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. So we're looking for input this evening in our budget. And this is what we would describe as being kind of a fluid process. There is nothing that is going to make it incredibly rigid, because we're trying to get input from home at the same time we're getting input from members of the audience, at the same time we're getting input from council, and of course all the input goes to city staff. So this is not the normal, sort of more formal kind of approach to a meeting. We will be looking, as always, for questions from home, and I'll continue to remind people at home that if they've got questions, if they have input, to use a number of various platforms that we have in order to access that. So what I'm going to do at this point is to turn a description of the to the city clerk for the E-Town Hall and how it's going to work. Davina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as you have mentioned, the purpose of tonight's meeting is for Council to engage with the community and receive comments and questions from the public on the 2018 to 2022 five-year financial plan. We would ask the public to direct their questions and input to our social media channels. They are noted on the screen right now, but questions or comments via email can come to citypa@portalberni.ca. Through Facebook, the address is at City of Port Alberni, and our Budget 2018 events page will accept questions. Twitter, at City Port Alberni, or by using the hashtag BudgetPA. So those are the means for the public to provide their questions and comments. As well, Council throughout the meeting can accept questions from the floor from those people in the audience this evening. Our Manager of Communications, Alicia Pusap, is here. She's working with the CAO to help disseminate and collate the questions and comments that will be received through our social media channels. We also have staff in attendance in the hot seat. Particularly, we have our Director of Parks, Recreation and Heritage, Willa Thorpe, and Manager of Operations, Wolf Takama. We're expecting that Council may have some questions around our capital projects. As well, we have a number of our other staff members in attendance as well, who can also be called on to answer questions as necessary. And Council will note that we do have a fairly large agenda as well. There's a number of reports included on the agenda, and in between any questions that we might have, Council will be able to work through those reports. And if we get to a point where Council has had enough or doesn't want to go any further this evening, we can certainly arrange another meeting to continue with the reports. But primarily, we're here to hear from the public this evening. So with regards to the meeting, we have no specific time limit for questions. We're not using our 3-minute timer that we typically use at council meetings. We're here to answer questions from the public. We would ask, though, that the public are succinct with their questions, that they're respectful and constructive, And if the questions or comments that we see don't meet those guidelines, then we certainly won't bring them forward. And of course, council, through you, Mr. Mayor, can answer any of the questions, but through our staff as well, can be called upon through the CAO to respond as necessary. And that, I think, pretty much lays out the process for the evening.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McClellan.
Yeah, just a question, are we only accepting questions, or are we also taking suggestions from the audience as well?
Comments and input as well, Mr. Mayor.
Just that it said questions.
Sorry, yeah.
And council, also, as always, if you have questions of the process or the information that we're getting or what have you, please, through me, we'll get those questions out there just to make sure that everybody has lots of opportunity. All right. So are we all right, council, to proceed? Okay. Then at this point, we're going to do is to go through a series of sort of presentations where if there are people wish clarification on any of these things, it's a good opportunity to do it right after each presentation. And then there certainly will be opportunities, as I said, throughout for people to send in questions or provide us with questions from the audience. So at this point, we'll get the City CAO, Tim Ply, to review the current draft 5-year financial plan and the project's options list. And Councillor, you'll see that on page 62.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned in the agenda package that council has in front of them and that is available online on the city's website, pages 6 through 61 are the city's the draft 5-year financial plan. That includes both the operational budget and the capital. And at the end of that, pages 62 to 64, you'll see the project's options list. Now, council will recall that we reviewed the project's options list at our last budget meeting. We did not review the draft capital budget, and council expressed that they wanted to go through that line by line. And so it's our intention a little later in the meeting to go through the capital budget under bullet number 4 and the 2018 aspect of the capital budget. We weren't not intending to go through the operating budget line by line, but if there are questions about that budget, then Mr. Mayor, staff are happy to support council in answering those questions. But at this point, I would suggest that we move on to the question and answer because we will be covering the capital and the projects list later in the agenda.
Okay. Council, before we move on to that, the questions and answer, the questions that came from the last meeting with their accompanying answers, any urgent questions that council wishes to have answered before we proceed? All right, seeing none, then I'll turn the question and answer piece over to our city clerk.
Mr. Mayor, did you just want me to run through?
The questions
through
with
them?
their response, yeah, please.
So the first one, Mr. Mayor, from the last meeting, council requested a breakdown of McLean Mill capital projects, and that has been provided. It's one of your late items. So council will be able to review that a bit later in the meeting. The second question was how much was in the reserve fund for the pool and what were the details of the fund. So the balance at the end of 2016 was $1.978 million. This comes from an annual transfer of 10% of Parks and Recreation revenue to the reserve, plus additions at council's discretion. 2016 includes a transfer of $152,000 from the Rcmp operating surplus. Council asked if an electric vehicle was a consideration for additional bylaw resources. And we determined that the carbon fund could be used to purchase an electric vehicle. Approximately $110,000 is the projected balance of the fund for the end of 2018. There are no currently underutilized vehicles in our fleet available for regular use if we had an extra bylaw enforcement officer. An electric vehicle is not recommended for bylaw enforcement use, but there is a plan to use one in the city's fleet. And further information can be provided on that. Council asked about the SPCA contract for service and is inflation built in. The current service agreement was signed in 2000 and is on a year-to-year basis. The amount of the contract in 2017 was $147,540. There is no inflation built into the contract. I information technology report regarding data storage, server versus cloud. There is a report from our information technology manager included on the agenda this evening, so council will review that later on. Details of the RCMP surplus. Is the current fund level enough to cover the cost of major events? Inspector Hunter is here this evening and will be able to respond verbally to council on that one. Identify whether the options list projects are capital or operational. There is a list attached on the agenda outlining that, as is detail regarding 2017 the options list, the supplemental options. Council wanted to identify which projects were completed and reasons why others were not. And that, again, is one of the late items that council has this evening as well. So those were the questions from the last meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I'm just thinking, rather than lose track of these things, there's a couple of items, a couple of these where, you know, we're looking more at a verbal response to some of them, and this may be an opportunity to have an overview or a review of some of those before we move on. The first one would be the breakdown of McLean Mill capital projects and the prioritize the list. And I see that Bill Collette's to provide an itemized projects list, which he has done. Would this be an appropriate time for Mr. Collette to join the group?
The CEO provided the report, Mr. Mayor, so I'm not sure if you want to ask the CEO to review that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I see that late report on McLean Mill Society Capital is identified as a late item under C5.
Right. So
If you want to do it now, we can do it now. And
it'd be good to get it.
Yep.
We might as well. It's
I see Mr. Collette in the audience, and I'm sure he's primed to interact with council. Yep.
sure. Come on up here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Pardon me for sitting down, but I tend to shake a little bit, so tremor disorder. So what we really wanted to talk to Council about tonight is our overall ask for capital remains the same as it was last year, $125,000. It also remains the same as we presented in our 5-year budget to Council on March 1st, 2017. 125,000. So I can go over the item list if you like, but essentially we've got a list of items that we think are important to keep the asset in good shape. The priority, of course, is the tracks, which we identified last year, March 1st as well. So the tracks are always our #1 priority with the capital budget. So it's always a bit of an unknown. So we always keep that front and center for us. So, but essentially that's where we're at with the capital.
Okay, so I'll just start off with questions related to this. The track repair of $55,000, that's just tracks, not trestles, am I correct?
That's just track, yep. So trestles is something a little bit different.
So for the $55,000, is that the ties, or is it the replacing some of the actual rails themselves, or is it the ballast for the rails, or all of the above?
Well, I think it's a number that we've isolated for whatever is identified as the primary need. CEO can probably jump in there if there's items that I'm unaware of, but certainly that's a number that in general we're keeping aside every year, minimum.
Okay. And how have you had any ongoing discussions with Fortis about getting natural gas out to the site?
We haven't yet. We did about a year ago. We did have an assessment. It was a big number, so we haven't pursued that any further, but it's definitely something that we would like to do at some point in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Council, any other questions on this? Councillor Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At our January 8th meeting, we got a statement, year-to-date November 2017, from the executive director, and it showed a net income of $146,000. And at our last budget meeting, Mr. Collette had said that that number has changed drastically. I'm just wondering if we have a more detailed number on that, because, I mean, to give this, to take this, if they're sitting on 146,000, it just, you know, people at home aren't gonna understand that.
Right.
So, yeah, as I tried to clarify at the last meeting, that November number was as we knew at the time. We've received a number of invoices, mostly from the Industrial Heritage Society, adding up to significant dollars. A lot of what we took on late in the year was stuff that we had delayed based on our track maintenance plan for early in the year. So right now, I can tell you, I happened to look at our bank account just the other day, or today, sorry, and we're a little less than 30,000 in there, and we've just signed a bunch of checks as well today. So as I stated a couple of weeks ago, we are probably in the $10,000 to $15,000 carryover range, and that might be generous. You know, we're still receiving bills, and so that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Council? So just to clarify, we've got the ask is the total capital requirements is 130,000. Am I correct?
It is. That's you know, I should clarify that. Our initial ask was 125. That's what we presented last year. We're satisfied with 125 this year. When we added up the dollars, it added up to 130. We can easily eliminate that extra $5,000. That's not going to be a problem. We'd like to stay the course with our initial ask of council.
Okay, and then there's insurance on top of that of $31,000, right?
Yeah, same as last year's ask. Yeah.
Right, so $156,000. If you add
Well,
the two together.
yeah, if you add the two together. And then there's the operational one as well. So we, you know, that's still an outstanding point of concern for us as well.
I don't think it was in our options list.
It was,
Oh, was it?
yes.
Okay.
So if I may clarify on that, again, going back to March 1st last year, for simplicity's sake, we asked for three numbers. One was $225,000 in operations
Yeah.
for year one. The second one we asked for was the insurance premium, which I'm not exactly sure what that equated to last year, but I think it was around $36,000. And the third ask was for the capital at $125,000. That's what we asked for in 2017. We drove that down for 2018 by 11% on the operations to $200,000. For whatever reason, right now in front of council, you're looking at 175 on operations. We're looking at 200,000 based on our 2017 5-year plan that we presented to you. So we're at a difference of 25,000 on the operations.
Okay, thank you. So CAO, just to clarify for me, I have a draft supplementary projects list. And on that draft supplementary projects list, it says under Heritage and Culture, McLean Mill Capital Projects, $100,000. And then it says Railway Insurance, $31,000. And then I have a note that we're adding another $30,000 to the McLean Mill Capital Projects. And now Mr. Collette's saying, well, actually, it's only 25. But there's nowhere on this draft supplementary projects list that says anything about 200,000, as somehow it has to come out of our 809,000 bucks.
Mr. Mayor, I'll see if I can not muddy this more. So we have, part of the challenge we have here is that last year we went through this process and we had a bare bones operational budget and a bare bones capital budget for McLean Mill, and we had several items on the options list which were adopted by council. But there was no direction. We didn't ask, you didn't direct that we put those numbers on McLean Mill's budget every year. So here we are again in the second year with a bunch of option listings. And I would suggest going forward that we stop putting these supplemental pieces on the options list if if we're gonna fund this, McLean Mill to this tune, we should just put that in the draft budget. But that's my editorial. So currently what you're looking at is in the draft budget, there's $175,000 on the operating side. And there's $30,000 on the capital in the draft budget. That $30,000 represents $30,000 that we received from the regional district, or we anticipate receiving, that we're gonna pass on. On the supplemental list, there's a further $100,000 of city funds on the capital to bring it up to a total of $130,000. So that's why the $130,000 in total capital, and Mr. Collette just offered to operate at $125,000, I think.
Yeah.
Also on the options list is $31,000 for insurance. Last year it was $36,000, this year our price quote is $31,000. And then also, if you look in the agenda, this was new from the last meeting, so it might not be on your hard copy. McLean Mill Society asked for a further $25,000 in operating funds. And Mr. Collette just spoke to that. That McLean Mill Society, when they presented March 1st of 2017, they asked for $200,000 in 2018. The numbers they had provided previously in January were $175,000, and they were just getting started as a society, so obviously they were building their budget. And so we ended up with two different numbers, the number that was in our budget and the number that was in their ask, and the two never got reconciled. So so in the draft budget, we put $175,000 because that was what was in last year's draft budget. But McLean Mill Society did ask for $200,000 for this year in their presentation. I hope that didn't muddy that worse.
It muddied it a lot for me, but that's okay. I just need to know, what's the real number that council is considering tonight?
On the options list,
On our options list, on our draft supplementary projects list,
You're
what's the
considering-
real number?
you're considering three things: $100,000 on capital, $31,000 on rail, and $25,000 on operations. And Mr. Collette just offered to take $5,000
Reduce
off
five, yeah.
the $100,000.
So it's 75,000.
No.
So I get 151 is what my math says. Is that correct?
95 plus 31 plus 25.
Okay. I think I got it. Councillor McClellan.
Well, you're doing very good. I'm hearing the 30,000 is coming, there's a 30,000 they hope is coming from the regional district, and that could be more or less, which would be added to what we have here, so that would probably muddy us up a bit more. I guess my question is, how does insurance become an optional? How does that get on an optional budget? That should never, if we're gonna run something, we gotta insure it, we can't have it on the optional budget. And the other thing that I have a bit of concern is saying that $25,000 is an option, when really over the years, we have done very much higher than 200,000, and 200,000 is quite cheap as far as our history of paying. So I'm having a problem having this so-called extra 25,000 coming out of the options, when really it should just be in it as a yes or no, and we can debate it whether we want to have it that high or not. But I don't think it should be coming out of the options budget. That's just my opinion, and we can talk about that later. It's not something we have to decide tonight.
Okay, thank you. CAO?
Mr. Mayor, I agree with the previous statement that going forward, at the end of this process, I'd like to ask council to give direction to include all of these things in the draft budget, and you can consider them in the draft budget. The history of that rail insurance outside of, or on the options list, is that when IHS was managing McLean Mill, that insurance fee was included in their operating grant, and they would pay it back to the city because we paid for the insurance. McLean Mill Society came to us and said, well, that shouldn't be in our budget because we don't pay it and it's out of our control. And it's outside of the scope of the McLean Mill Society, so it ended up being separated on an options list, that it really was about railway as opposed to mill. So that's how it ended up in the options list, but I would suggest going forward that for the city's purposes, we include that in the McLean Mill operating budget at our end, so we know where all the costs are.
So we're not really talking about $809,000. We're really talking about $658,000.
Mr. Mayor, it's at council's discretion.
Okay, I just, trying to get the number right, and if it's not really flexible, if there's some stuff that really we have no choice but to consider, I just want to know, what is the big number that we're working with? And when the big number keeps changing, it's a little difficult for council to, to fully keep track of it all. Just being honest in terms of how we're dealing with this, it keeps changing. It's a flexible number.
I can appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. And from the process that we followed, this is an optional expenditure. It's not a mandatory expenditure. It was never pre-approved by council last year. So it is an option.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo what Councilor McClellan said. He took the words right out of my mouth. As far as the railway insurance goes, I don't know why if we are committed to the McLean Mill and they are committed to running rail, then I don't know why insurance would ever be an option. Surely we can't run the railway without an insurance. So I don't know why that's on the options list. And I was going to bring that up previously. Along the same lines, I certainly, I think the CAO is correct as far as us bringing those operational things into the actual financial plan. That makes sense. But again, on the railway side of things, this is our asset. It isn't McLean Mill's asset, and we went through that whole process, and we're pretty clear on it now. So I would even suggest that the maintenance of that railway should be in our operational budget, not necessarily in the McLean Mill budget, but that's another debate to have.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Collette, I think you did a great job of explaining something
Hopefully.
challenging. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor, we could go to some of our input from social media. If this
Perfect,
is an
sure.
opportune moment. So not related to McLean Mill, different subject completely, but we do have a question provided through Facebook from Philasis Gnome. Will money be allocated to combat the crime problem downtown in the 3rd and Argyle area?
And one of the items for a person at home with the question at home is, one of the items under consideration is approximately $220,000 for bylaw enforcement, and that's specifically to look at the conditions related to that crime. And of course, we spend a tremendous amount on policing in this community as well. Yeah, there's one of the things under consideration is lighting and security subsidy as well.
And just another comment through Facebook, Mr. Mayor, from Caroline Robertson. It's not a question, it's more of a comment. I'm concerned that the city has funded less police positions. In light of the recent increase in crime, this needs to be addressed. As a taxpayer, I would gladly give up other services to have my family and community safe. I've lived in the 3rd and Argyle area for an extended period of time, and RCMP members do an excellent job. We cannot give them less resources and then say do more. I would really encourage the city to fund at least one more member permanently, preferably 2. Thank you to all the RCMP members who serve our community for doing a difficult and at times stressful job.
Okay, perfect. This is a great segue into some members in our audience. And council, we probably know what this is about, but I bet you there are people at home don't know why we're receiving this. So I'll let you introduce yourselves and what you're going to talk about.
Good evening, I'm Gracie Mitchell.
My name is Maddie O'Neill-Johns.
I'm Morgan Williams.
And I'm Katie Sarah. And we're here from the Social Justice 12 class.
Okay.
You can begin.
So we, the Social Justice 12 class, are requesting a tax property increase of only $1.80 per month per residential property. Since early December, our class has been working to have a youth liaison officer dedicated in Valley schools. Our petition, A Cup for a Cop, has risen to 264 on paper and 343 online. The question of the week in the Alberni Valley News had 79% support for tax dollars going towards youth policing. Having a youth liaison officer in our Valley schools is not just important regarding criminal activity, but also in educating youth and for the safety of the victims, students, and staff. The job of a youth liaison officer is not just to deal with what happens at school, but also what happens on the weekend and at home. The proactive and preventative policing helps students become better educated while having a role model within the school. The repercussions of not having an officer at ADSS result in less drug seizures on campus, increased amounts of serious bullying issues, and a decrease of legal information on consent both off and online. Youth liaison officers are proactive but reactive when they need to be. The procedure to deal with the criminal offenses and accusations differs substantially regarding whether or not a youth liaison officer is present. If a student is accused of assault or rape, and a police officer feels they have grounds to arrest the accused, they will immediately be removed from class, handcuffed, read their rights, forced into a police car, and taken into a station. This is all done in front of their peers and teachers. If the accusation proves to be false, as this does happen, their reputation is ruined.
However, if a youth liaison officer is present, a youth is dealt with more discretion. The officer understands the youth's social reputation and how an arrest can impact a student. Therefore, a youth liaison officer will call a student's parents and allow them to drive their child to the police station before arrest to avoid negative attention. A youth liaison officer is someone who students can talk to about their problems, who understands confidentiality, and who knows the needs of each student. For example, when a student has experienced trauma, they need support, not an officer going through a checklist. Having an officer from regular duty does not allow for a relationship between students and an officer. Because of this, if a student goes to report an assault or rape and there's no dedicated youth liaison officer, a student will be sent back to class or directed to go to the police station themselves. However, if there is one on duty, a student goes to report a serious crime, the officer will be available within minutes. The youth liaison officer was based out of ADSS 2 days a week, but is on active duty within the general community. The main difference of having a dedicated youth liaison officer is that our administration can call them directly and they will respond as quickly as they are able. We also want to recognize how incredibly hard each police officer works in the Valley. We know that they have very little time to be proactive since they are going from call to call. And we want them to know we are so grateful for their hard work and dedication. We hope to be able to work more with Inspector Hunter to figure out how to keep a dedicated youth liaison officer while meeting the needs of the community. Having a youth liaison officer in our schools is invaluable to us, our fellow students, teachers, and administration. We strongly urge Council to add this to their optional projects on the budget this year. And we also want to know how we can work with Council and the Rcmp to make this happen.
Okay, anything else?
No.
Okay. We do have Inspector Hunter here, and I'm going to call on him in a minute, but just want to give a little bit of response from my perspective, and then I'm sure other people in council will want to. You know, having been principal of ADSS, you're describing major changes in terms of the way business is done, and you know, it is the discretion of the school's administration to call on help and call parents and use restorative justice and use all sorts of different approaches in terms of dealing with students and discipline or behavior, or however you want to, however you want to characterize it. But we had tremendous flexibility and discretion in terms of how we dealt with each individual situation. It was extremely rare that we would have to respond in a manner that you're describing. So you're describing something that is, in my experience, is quite extraordinary rather than common.
Well, last week we had a couple kids handcuffed and put in the back of a police car at our school, so we watched that happen the other day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that in the middle of exams?
No, it would have been the week before, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, not in the middle of exams.
Okay. Well, thank you. Things maybe have changed a little bit in the interim. Okay, thank you very much. Council, any questions? Councillor Sauvé and then Councillor McClellan.
More of a comment. I totally support the initiative, but you have to understand, and again, the inspector explained this before, yes, the youth officer is there 2 times a week and all that, and that's good news for the city. I'm surprised we're even able to do that, because with the rate of calls that they're dealing with every day, and people going on sick leave, holidays, or injuries, which there's a lot, it's hard for a detachment commander to be able to allocate full-time, dedicated youth officer into school. If you're having 2 days, this is just past experience, if you already have 2 days of that at the school, you're very lucky.
We don't currently. We were saying before he got removed from our school.
Well, as a matter of fact, having 2 days, you're even lucky. The fact is that he said it in his own statement, and correct me if I'm wrong, Inspector, but when you're dealing with all these personnel issues and all that you're a missing man, he has a mandate to make sure that every shift is properly covered, not only for the public, but for officer safety and so forth. And when it hits the fans, all hands are on deck. Like, I mean, he pulls it from the school liaison, he pulls it from community policing. They're all policemen, and all hands are on deck. And I see that happening lots of times during the summer. Again, there's no school during the summer, but to have one dedicated there, I personally cannot see the inspector making a promise that he will be there as a dedicated position all the time.
Okay, Councillor McClement.
Yeah, just a question. Are you looking for a police officer to be resident at the school every day, all week?
No, we just want to go back to how it was before, so the 2-day in the school, and then being able to be called into the school whenever there's an emergency.
So this officer wasn't just at AD, was he? Or she, was it the other schools as well?
Yeah, they attended all Valley schools, but they were based out of ADSS 2 days a week, and when they weren't at the schools, they were on regular duty.
Okay.
Okay, and just before I go on to Councillor Washington, just to clarify that in the 2018 budget, there is no proposal to reduce the number of police officers in Port Alberni. I guess that's more for the question from home than it is for you. You probably already knew that. Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your presentation's awesome. Have you stood in front of School District 70 and made the same presentation just to see if you can get either support, any kind of support from the school district?
We went to the PAC meeting, but we haven't asked for like any money within the school.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alberni.
Yeah, I think what you're really looking for is that relationship to come back, and I don't know if the council can allocate more money and guarantee that an RCMP officer is there. I'm pretty sure that we can't guarantee that. That's up to the inspector, and that's fine. But certainly, hopefully, we can put in direction to try to ensure that relationship is solid. Because if it's not, if he or she isn't there for 2 days or 3 days, whatever it takes to be able to create a meaningful relationship with students and staff and be able to work inside of the schools, then there's no point having them there. So they do need to be there at some point. So I don't know if it means allocating more money to the RCMP. I don't know if that will, in the end, help the problem or not. There can always be more resources put into the RCMP, but the question is how they're used. So.
Okay, Councillor Sobey.
Yeah, just in response to Councillor Alberni, I don't think the inspector needs any direction. I think that the inspector's wishes is to actually have that happening. He wants that to happen, and he sees every day the benefit of it, and a lot of the students, teachers sees the benefit. It's if he's capable to, and that's another issue. And it all comes down to money. Like I know in our 5-year plan, in 2019, we're scheduled to cut a position. Well, that's a wrong direction to go, and I'll address that a bit later. But these are the things that, he wants it to be there. Mm-hmm. He doesn't like to start pulling people from different sections of policing and all that. That's the last thing he wants to do. Yeah. But again, his priority, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually the safety of the community, and he has to take every resource he can to get it. Thanks.
And just one last thing I'll leave you with. I haven't had a chance to share this with council yet. I am meeting on Thursday with a representative of the federal government, and that's one of the things that I'll be asking for is, are there some additional resources from that level of government that can be directed our way in order to assist us with some of the issues that we face related to community safety and community security resources. So we'll see. I don't know. All I can do is make the ask, but at least we've got them coming here.
And yeah, we were just wondering how you guys suggest that we can continue to work with council and the RCMP to help make this happen.
Well, I'd say you have a really good in on this one. I'd be talking to our MP and saying, look, we need some help, and what can you do in order to help us help ourselves?
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Alemany. I mean, sorry, Councillor Paulson. You don't even look like
I'm not
Councillor
that
Alemany.
handsome, no.
Okay,
I would just like to hear from Officer in Charge Hunter. He was at our last council meeting and kind of gave us an overall, I don't believe that the school program has fallen off the table, but there are circumstances, and perhaps you could just reiterate what you told us at the last council meeting.
and Inspector Hunter, since you're coming up anyway, could you also answer or respond to the item on the details of the RCMP surplus? Is the current fund level enough to cover the cost of a major event?
Thank you, Your Worship, Council. In reference to our youth liaison officer, as I spoke at the last council meeting, the city of Port Alberni pays for 34 positions at the detachment, and they're currently full. That being said, there are several positions where the members aren't at the office for various reasons. And I just wanted to get that out there. You know, there's talk in the community well, I've heard there's talk in the community. Are we intentionally leaving positions vacant for financial reasons and that type of thing? Absolutely not. If you may recall last year at this time, and I think I was hitting the table when I was talking, if I had my way, I wouldn't return any money to the city. And what that means is all of the positions would be full with boots on the road. So when we have parental leave and maternity leave, those positions cannot be backfilled, but we don't charge the city for those. Similarly, when someone is long-term sick, you've heard some stories of officers getting injured on the job. Since our last meeting, another officer got injured, probably out for about 8 or 9 weeks, affecting an arrest on somebody. So we don't charge the city when they're not working, but I cannot transfer somebody in on a temporary basis. Next thing you know, you have too many officers here because I can't just transfer them back to where they came from. So what happens when these positions become vacant? We prioritize our calls, and safety, life and limb is number one in this community. And we have to ensure that our general duty staffing is at a level that we can respond to our calls for service, all the while officer safety is paramount. And we're at a phase right now where we are short a few officers in general duty. The school liaison position in mid-December was redeployed to one of the watches. And I will say, it's 100% true. I don't like redeploying resources, but it's something that I'm responsible for. In the interest of safety in the community. There's been members redeployed from other units as well. So that covers off the school liaison. Councillor Sauvé was very accurate in his statement that we all agree a youth liaison officer is an amazing resource in our community and the connections there. We just so happen right now with Constable Wesleyan, probably one of the best youth liaison officers in the country. We're very fortunate to have him in our community. It's the unfortunate part is we're a bit short on the response-oriented side of the house, and we need him over there. So that's that. The surplus, the fund that is maintained at $1 million, and last year council made a decision to, when funds are available, possibly go up to $2 million. Is $1 million enough? And what we talk about in policing are these serious crimes. If we have a homicide where we roll into the scene and it's fairly quickly evident who the accused person is, those are fairly straightforward. Although they're homicides, they're fairly straightforward to investigate, and you're not going to get into $1 million there. We call them extraordinary investigative techniques on the classic whodunit murders, or a missing person likely murdered. That's when you get into undercover operations, wiretaps, various judicial authorizations are required to do these extraordinary investigations which require a lot of resources, and you can get to $1 million pretty quickly with those types of investigations. So $1 million is great. 2 million would obviously be better. You can't predict if one of these extraordinary offenses is going to happen in our community. I checked with Camel River, Courtney Detachment, Nanaimo, Parksville, Duncan, Sydney Detachment. Nanaimo Detachment has $1 million fund as well, set aside for policing, looking at going to 2 million. You may or may not recall in the past weeks there's been a serious crime in Nanaimo, a shooting, and I can tell you that is going to be expensive. So you just don't know when these things are going to happen, but I say we're ahead of the curve, having that $1 million. I said that when I first got here. I'm impressed with that, and it's like a type of insurance. I really hope we never have to get into that someday, but you guys are very smart having that in this community.
But are you recommending 2 million?
I did last year, and I believe, and CAO Ply may be able to speak to that there was an agreement to bring it up to $2 million.
CAO?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Our balance is 1 million, but council set the ceiling on that account to 2 million last year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sobey?
Just one question about those funds allocated for major crime and so forth, the 1 million. Is that only if there's major crime that happens within the city limits? And if there's one that happens in a regional district, do they have a similar fund?
Thank you for the question. Your Worship, that is within the city limits, that $1 million would be used. So when you're a community of over 15,000, as you guys know, there's the 90-10 split. You pay 90% of policing and the government pays for 10. If you are under, it would be a 70-30 split. Any detachments that police 90-10, the municipality is responsible for the costs related to major crimes. Now, the rural area, the Vancouver Island Integrated Major Crime Unit would come up and take care of that. Obviously, no cost to the city, and there's no extra cost to the rural area either. It's a whole different unit comes in. For example, we had a missing person last year, a very expensive investigation missing out of Port Alberni. They were found murdered in the regional district, and at that point, the Vancouver Island Major Crime Unit took over that investigation. It was although it's my policing jurisdiction for homicides, it's their jurisdiction to investigate.
Okay, anything else, Council? Councillor McClement?
Yeah, excuse me, you mentioned Vancouver Island Investigative Unit. Is that not available to municipalities as well? Or could that be made available to municipalities? And when I've been thinking back on the conversation I had with you a while back, that, there's only so much time in a day and you can only do so much, and you're doing a very good job with what you're doing. So if they could come and assist the municipalities, would that be a help? And is there a way we can push that to happen?
Thank you. Your Worship, what we're doing is we're looking at that. The Vancouver Island Integrated Major Crime Unit several years ago talked about what would it look like for other municipalities to buy into that unit. It would look like, what it would look like is the city would pay likely for a police officer to be in that unit. They would work out of Victoria. And if ever there was a major crime in Port Alberni, the entire unit would come up and investigate that, no different than if a crime happened in Victoria. So you would have a Port Alberni member, pay for a Port Alberni member on that unit that would be in Victoria, Oak Bay, Saanich. So what we're hoping for in moving forward with E-Division Major Crime is that they actually come up with a funding formula for all municipalities to buy into, like it's the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team on the Lower Mainland, IHIT, to come up with a formula and what does that cost. We're not there at this moment in time. And what's interesting with that, though, when I get into speaking about these extraordinary investigations, the $1 million, the $2 million, $3 million investigations, regardless if we paid into that, those extraordinary amounts wouldn't even be covered. Those are very large substantial, extraordinary investigations.
Yeah, we haven't heard anything from that particular potential initiative for a year and a half.
And a year and a half sounds about right. When I arrived here June of last year, I looked into it right away, and I have not heard as well. Ultimately, I would like it to be mandated across the province for all municipalities and all regional districts to have a formalized major crime unit that comes in and does these investigations, as Councillor McClement says, so we can focus on the other serious crimes happening in the community. Meanwhile, the serious crime unit comes in to take care of those. We're not there right now, and I'll certainly keep everyone posted.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Council? All right, Inspector Hunter, thank you so much. And ADSS students, I hope that helped to address some of your questions. Any questions from home?
We do, Mr. Mayor. We have another one through our Facebook from Rosalind Chapman asking, why is the city's Youth Advisory Committee inactive? Increasing more money for a youth liaison officer is unacceptable to this resident. Use the committee that we have to make recommendations and to explore alternate solutions.
Well, that's actually an interesting question. Turn it over to Director Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at a previous council meeting in the fall, we had discussed the Youth Advisory Committee, and it was council's wish to disband the committee. I've since actually met with Ms. Ostwald's social justice class and have reached out directly to the students and have offered resources from the Parks, Recreation and Heritage budget specifically to work with them on programming opportunities. So that's in progress as we speak. And just for the viewers at home, like I said to council, that it's my view that having a youth advisory committee is not a requirement if we're engaging our youth directly and effectively. And I feel strongly that we currently are doing those things well. And so I can reassure those viewers at home that yes, those options are in effect as we speak.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, City Clerk? Not right now. All right, get those questions in if you've got them. Okay, thank you very much. Council, then that brings us to City CAO will be able to go on and do the overview of the 2018 capital projects.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 36 of your agenda package is the start of the 2018 capital budget spreadsheet. There it is on the screen. And you'll see that the projects are categorized operationally. And I would ask that several of our managers cycle through and speak at a high level in terms of what these projects represent. In a similar way to last meeting, Mr. Mayor, I would ask that council help staff in staying high level on this. If you have specific questions you want to drill into, we can certainly do that and respond to all the questions you want. Otherwise, staff will be attempting to give you paint a picture of what the project is and then moving on to the next. So the first one under administration is primarily computer purchases, and I'll ask Mr. Pellick to speak to those three.
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Pellick.
Hello. So the first item that you see, the $63,600, that is an annual item. That comes out of an IRF fund that covers off the cost of all of our replacement infrastructure items that we do every single year. So that's not a special thing in our world. That's not replacing a server. That's replacing the computers, the laptops, anything like that we have to do throughout the year as far as equipment is concerned. Purchases of cell phones, tablets, things like that. So we pay into the fund from our department. All departments pay into it, and then every year we're able to access that money, so it's there, it's collected. The second item, as you see there, it's highlighted. It's actually coming forward from 2017. It actually was approved in 2016. That amount of money was approved for a special list of projects that my department assists in, but it's actually not necessarily our projects. So what that works out to is the electronic records management software for the clerk's department. That was to be funded from Carbon Trust. I'm just giving you the history on this. Tempest software. Tempest is the program that we use for our land, taxes, utilities. When the public citizen comes in and they make payments or want to see their utilities online, water, sewer, things like that. So that's where that money was to come from for that. And as well, I believe there's a solid waste web application that was coming from Carbon Trust. So again, part of that whole utilities software, that's what makes up that. And then the third one down, mapping and GIS software asset management planning. That has to do with the GIS side of things, which ties back into our engineering. But it also highlights how GIS or geointerspatial systems can impact other things, such as asset management. Which is actually something that our finance department and some of our insurance people are really very interested in, to make sure we've got some asset management planned for the future. And that comes down to some water meter software, various mapping software from different companies, Esri, AutoCAD, FME, and others.
Okay, Councillor McClellan and then Councillor Sobey.
Yeah, on the highlighted one, but first of all, carried forward from 2017, approved in 2016, where's the $53,230 been up to now?
That has been held over.
So it's in an account, it's in a reserve right now?
Yes, that's exactly right.
So it's not in this budget then, so it shouldn't be up there, maybe?
I didn't create the sheet, sorry, Councillor.
I understand that, but that's my first question. I have one other right after.
Go ahead, ask your question.
Well, I thought maybe, okay. The other one is the third one, mapping and GIS says not capital, and this is in capital projects budget. Why is it in capital projects budget?
Our finance director might be able to answer that more correctly than I can. I believe it's there because it has a tie-in back to the asset management side. Is that right? Yes.
Well, asset management is a bunch of bookwork anyway, but we'll find out later.
Okay. Councillor Sobey.
Yeah, just one question about the same highlighted item. Is this our contribution or overflow from the Evergreen project? Is that it? Or do we still contribute to that?
No, the highlighted item doesn't have anything to do with the evergreening in the RCMP terms, as you're familiar with, the EAR Fund. These are software programs that have been scheduled for update for a while, and we have not been able to undertake it, quite simply. Okay. So they've been funded in previous budgets, carried over, and we're going to try and get them done as soon as we can in 2018.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. CEO.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Mr. Pellick. While we're waiting for the fire chief to come up and speak to the next three items, I'd like to inform council that the project list that we're looking at right now, this is a 2018 capital. All of these projects were pre-approved in the previous 5-year plan, or they've been added here because they are a hard safety item that we just don't see a way that we can't do. Anything that wasn't in one of those two categories is in the options list, just for council's awareness.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Chief Gilday.
Thank you. So first thing I have on the list is the Gerald air compressor, which is what we use to replace the air in our Scott bottles, not only for our department, but the rest around the city. So it was scheduled to be replaced in 2018. We're currently going through an assessment on that to see if we can put that off if it's got too many hours on it or whatever. But it's a critical part of our equipment, and we simply can't do without it. The second one on the list is our gas detection equipment, which is what we use when we respond to the homes for carbon monoxide detector problems, and when we go in any hazardous atmospheres to make sure it's at least somewhat safe for our members. And that equipment needs to be replaced. And the last one is a fire hall generator, which was scheduled, the work was scheduled to start in 2017. We weren't able to start that project then, so put it off till 2018.
You weren't able to start, as you're saying?
No.
No. So, but this is funds from previous years, so
Yep, the 2017 was carried over to this year.
So it doesn't really impact the 2018 budget in any case, right?
No.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McClellan.
Just on that subject, if this doesn't impact the 2018 budget, are we screwing our numbers by looking at it and thinking we're spending more than we are?
I'm wondering, Director Rothwell.
Mr. Mayor, that document, we use it to track the capital projects from year to year, and we don't want them to drop off the radar, so if they're carried forward from a previous year, they go on there. That capital budget has all of the funding sources on it, not just the operating. So it doesn't necessarily affect the property tax portion of the city budget. Where it says operating, the column, it says cost and then operating, that is the column that affects the property tax portion of the budget.
So the gas detection equipment, that impacts 2018 budget,
That's right.
but the others don't.
No, IRF is its own fund, the carbon trust is its own fund. A reserve would be from something that was carried forward that would have been from the operating fund in a previous year.
And then if it's coming out of carbon trust, that won't reduce the amount of money that's available to us in 2018 for the carbon
No.
trust, because it's already been accounted for.
No, this, the 800,000 and change is after all of these projects.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Councillor McClement.
Yeah, just, if you don't mind, back up to administration, and in the highlighted one, it says it's 53,000 cost. Is that operating, or is that some other, I know it's from a previous year, but which way was that?
That's coming from Carbon Trust because it's all about paper saving.
Hmm, interesting. Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Councillor? Councillor Washington?
So bottom line is, so far we're looking at $10,000 in the operating budget, which would affect the 2018 budget.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. CAO?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Transportation Services, I'll refer to Mr. Takma.
Thank you, to Mr. Mayor and Council. So we're proposing in 2018 to replace 4 vehicles, 2 utility vehicles, one in the water department, one in the streets department, and 2 basically crew vehicles, one currently being driven by the wastewater charge hand and one by the utility superintendent. Any particular questions around there, I'd probably refer to our mechanical superintendent.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll move on.
I do have a question about a vehicle, but it's not about these 4. But since you're talking vehicles anyway, one of the proposals we're looking at is for our bylaw enforcement, a vehicle there. And it said that an electric vehicle is not appropriate in bylaw enforcement. But is a hybrid vehicle appropriate in bylaw enforcement? And if so, if it's a hybrid vehicle, and if it is appropriate, can it come out of our carbon trust money? As the IT van came out.
So my understanding on the hybrids is if it's got an alternator, yes, absolutely, it'll run the equipment. The carbon trust question, I think, so Kathy's nodding yes, so that could come out of the carbon trust fund.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Sauvé.
So if I understand it right, is that the hybrid, it was a recommendation that it would not be good for bylaw enforcement?
It was the
electric.
The electric.
The electric, I'm sorry, the electric.
Correct.
Is there reasoning behind that? Is it because of the capacity that is needed for the computer?
That's my understanding for the amount of electronics in a bylaw vehicle.
So if we didn't have that and we just use it for transport, it shouldn't be an issue?
I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
CEO.
Mr. Mayor, we may talk about this later in the evening, but staff have been looking at options. Council's been clear you want to explore an electric vehicle in the fleet. And we believe that we can purchase an electric vehicle and swap it out with another vehicle in the fleet that is used just for transportation and use that other vehicle for bylaw. So we believe we can accommodate an electric vehicle in the fleet through this process.
Okay. City Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, another question. We have several questions actually coming in along the whole bylaw services aspect, but one that might be relevant at this point. Question from Sissy Lindsay Scott that came in via Facebook. Why does the addition of new city bylaw officers have to include a car that costs $60,000? That is more than the majority of the population spend on a car. I don't feel like this is a logical use of money.
Okay. So, Mr. Takuma, did you want to answer that, or did you want,
Mr. Mayor, I can jump in on that. Mr. Shoveldave gave us a price of $50,000, 50, on an electric vehicle, and we budgeted $10,000 to have that vehicle outfitted for bylaw. The vehicle has to support, one of the vehicles has to support the function of bylaw, which includes lights and supporting an onboard computer system.
right, because we're not just buying a family car, we're buying,
That's correct.
we're buying the equipment that make it possible to
So
do
the
the work.
60,000 is the all-in price.
Okay, thank you. Councilor McLennan.
Yeah, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the high price is because it's an electric car and they're pricey. And politically or theologically or some way or another, we decided electric was best.
Yeah, okay. Anything else? CAO?
Moving on to paving and road construction.
Yep.
So you'll notice, when we're looking at the projects proposed under paving and road construction, the PTP, that's prior to paving, it's a little short form we use. So on the Coal Creek, Storm and Sandy, the paving portion of that is estimated at $130,000. But prior to paving, we've got storm and sanitary sewer work to be done. So those amounts will be under those sections where sanitary and water come out of reserves. Storm is operational, so these numbers will be operational. Athol Street, that's the development that's going on there. Once the services are put into that building, that piece of road is in pretty tough shape. It'll be in a lot tougher shape once the cuts are made, and we're proposing to repave the entire block. It's a short block, but we want to do the whole thing. The next project, Argyle, 17th and 21st, it's part of a bigger project that you'll see in a large grant funding application underwater. This is a portion that we would do if we weren't successful in the larger project. I think it's 3.8 million. It'll be a little further down. 6th Avenue, Argyle Street to Melrose, again a large project. That's a street that's in very tough shape, and services need to be replaced as well, and that would tie into the Coal Creek Phase 2. So we're talking about separating stormwater and sanitary water in that area, and this is the next logical phase tying into that Coal Creek Storm Phase 2, where we completed Phase 1 I think in 2016. North Park Drive, again, road in very tough shape, needs some upgrades on the storm and the sanitary sewer in that area. It's also downstream of the development at the old high school site, so we're taking that into account in terms of the overall engineering. Moving down, unless there's questions, sorry.
Good questions, Council? Councilor McLennan?
Yeah, just, I guess it's a question for this and a question for, those don't look like the same number I was looking at a minute ago. So anyway, I'll just ask the questions. Yeah, that's the one we were looking at. Another one, maybe the question you're better for. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3 approved in 2017, and it looks like $130,000 and $100,000 are coming out of reserves. So I presume that's money left over from 2017?
Approved in 2017 projects.
So the reserve that the money's coming from, then would be the last year's budget, am I correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Then the 300,000 is coming from operating.
It's new money.
So that's this year's. So I guess the other that was one question. The other one I've got is I noticed further on in our, and I may be jumping the gun to ask this question, but I noticed further on in the agenda, there's a request for early budget approval for some road construction. And I'm wondering if that's necessary to have it early when you've got the money for these ones and just go ahead and do them, or am I just thinking too simple or something?
The North Park, the reason we asked for early approval on the North Park Drive is that's one that we could start with city forces. We're not quite sure on the end. Some of them are tied up in the grant stuff that we won't get answers to probably till March.
So are these ones tied up in the grant that
Yeah,
are held over?
the 100,000 one is, and the Coal Creek as well. I think that Coal Creek is also in the grant application. So they're both grant related, and we don't really know when we'll get answers, but we're hoping by March. So we could get started on the North Park Drive with our forces.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Okay, Councillor Alberni?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple questions. Are any of the projects just in the paving and road construction? Because there's lots of storm and sandy going in there. Is any of that sort of along the lines of separating the storm and sanitary? Is it sort of advancing any of that?
Yeah, some of those projects are absolutely. Yeah, they're separation. Yeah, the Coal Creek from 5th Avenue up and then up into 6th Avenue. That's all separation related.
Cool. Great. So just a comment on it. You know, this is basic infrastructure and it has to be done. You know, we're looking at the better part of $1 million just on 4 items. I just want to take the opportunity to mention, because we didn't get a chance to actually discuss or even look at the Food Security and Climate Disruption Committee report last meeting, and the first recommendation was for staff to look at how we could reduce the amount of non-permeable, so asphalt surface in the city, because it does it would go along towards the lines of trying to reduce the amount of runoff and sanitary or stuff into our sanitary sewer and storm drains. So just a comment that if we're going to spend, you know, $825,000 on repaving a good portion of a bunch of roads, it would be nice if we could look at that as an opportunity to reduce the amount of runoff that's going to come from those roads. And you know, I don't know if we can direct that to a specific project, but that was the intent of that recommendation, was to try to reduce the long-term costs, both operationally and future capital costs. So, just so that council is aware.
I think one of the things you were going to take back to your committee was, how does that compare in terms of that cost compared to the traditional method?
That's what the committee asked, was to have staff prepare a report that would come up with those numbers. Yeah.
Okay, anything else, Council? Councillor Paulson?
I just have a question on that same topic, and what's your experience with access to that type of material on the island? Maybe it's being used in New York, but do we have access to that, the non-permeable product here on the island or in our area?
Are you referring to paving or like?
Yeah.
So paving generally is impermeable. I mean, one of the things we can look at in Port Alberni is taking some of our very wide streets and narrowing them up, right? So if you've got a grass boulevard, that obviously accepts rain a whole lot better than a paved street, you know, running into traps. So again, that's kind of the engineering side of it, and those are our conversations that we're having.
Okay, thank you. And just a question related to North Park, if this is something that we could do fairly soon, can we do it in this kind of weather, or do we have to wait for certain kinds of weather?
Yeah, certainly the weather we've been having recently is not good construction weather. I would think we're going to have some better weather soon. Generally, we wouldn't embark, you know, in January, February, but certainly, you know, if we could get started in March, that would get us going and get us ahead of the game in terms of the rest of our projects, because we do have a pretty ambitious program.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Paulson.
Just a quick clarification. So the 6th Avenue project and the North Park projects are actually related. Is that correct?
No, they're in different areas.
Oh, okay.
Different areas
Okay.
of town, yeah. North Park is just north of Dry Creek.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, CAO. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll scroll down, more for Mr. Tackman, I believe. Storm.
Yeah, so the next group there are storm drain-related projects, so replacements and upgrades. We generally have $100,000 set aside for storm main replacements and upgrades that come up during the year. Sometimes that money is spent, or a portion of it is spent, not necessarily all of it. The Hilton Avenue culvert replacement, that one got tied up in some easements and some legalities with the homeowners, and so consequently didn't get done in 2017, but we're hoping to complete that this year. And again, you'll see the portion related to storm for the North Park, $150,000 there. And again, 6th Avenue, Argyle to Melrose, and as well the Athol Street and Coal Creek as well under storm.
Okay, what's the real number for 6th Avenue, Argyle to Melrose? Because we're looking at
If you add them all, yeah, you gotta add them all up.
$280,000 is what we're considering, but yet you've got one of 400, one of 175, and then
Well,
another
yeah, if you go
225. So
scroll to the right, you'll see the other portion of that 400. It'll be under gas tax, yeah. Yeah, so there's a number of columns there you can't see on the screen.
okay. So, but what we're being asked to consider is 280,000. So I'm just wondering if you're shortchanging yourself somehow, or
No, so the portion of it that is just related to paving and road construction is 280,000. So this is the portion related to the storm replacement only. So you gotta add all the pieces up to get to the total project cost.
okay. Thank you, Councillor Sobey.
Just a question to the CAO. These funds, and this is mostly for public interest, but these funds are part of the 2017 budget and is already allocated, am I right?
Correct. Mr. Mayor, where it says carried forward from 2017, those funds were taxed for or acquired in 2017, and they're in reserve. The project wasn't done, and the money is in hand. We're not going to be taxing for that this year. That's correct.
Okay.
And so you'll see on those ones, there's no value under the column of operating, because that means we're not taxing for it in this year.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the public understands that.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, I think your question about 6th Avenue project, the 280,000, are you referring to the money that's on the options list?
Yes.
Yeah, so on the 6th Avenue project, I believe we're showing 3 blocks of reconstruction in the draft budget, and we're showing a further 2 blocks, I believe, in the options budget. So the 280 that you're referring to on the options list is an option for council. If you want to allocate those funds, we can do more of 6th Avenue than is currently in the budget. Is that correct, Wolf?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. City Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, while we're talking about road projects, we do have a question through email, HM Dufour. Is it acceptable for our city to not address the safety concerns of Grandview Road? The city portion of Grandview Road is the only stretch where pedestrians are required to share the lane with vehicles, as there are no shoulders on either side. There are no streetlights, pedestrians are very hard to see, and children have no other option than walking on the street to the bus stop and to Neil's school. This is also the only way to the mailboxes for pedestrians. Streetlights, a shoulder, a walkway, or a sidewalk need to be budgeted for this stretch of road.
And I do believe that is number 1 on our draft supplementary projects list. It's a $100,000 amount there. Yes, sir.
I want to address that very subject.
Sure, please come forward.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, city staff, my name is Mike Cahan. I live on Grandview Road, and I'm here to ask you to not spend any money.
Okay.
One of the few. Grandview Road is about a mile long. Quarter mile of Grandview Road on the west side belongs to the city. I'm the second property, and I'm here to speak for my neighbors on both sides of me, one in Otter Place and one at the beginning of Grandview. My property was formerly my grandparents who bought it in the 50s and built the house I currently live in. I bought it from my grandmother, and my wife and I have lived there for 20 years. We and our neighbors, the Vasonas, have street front hedgerow, which is the original fence line. And old fence posts are still visible in it. The hedgerow provides us with privacy and adds to the country nature of Grandview Road. Mr. Mayor, I want to quote you. In an interview you did on the radio recently, you said, anything the city does will be on their own property. But the current plan involves the Vasonas, the Croisdales, and my property. The city only has a road allowance on our 3 properties, and the choice to use it to cut down our hedgerow should not be taken lightly. My neighbors and I are not NIMBYs. All along we have said we would support the culverting of the shallow ditch on the west side of Grandview with a walkway on top. But my neighbors and I wonder why the city would choose to spend $100,000, an eighth of their safety and infrastructure budget, for a walkway on a rural road that has little traffic and isn't even a through road. It's a lot of money to spend to service very few taxpayers, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sobe. Sorry, Mike, maybe councillors might have a couple questions for you.
Certainly.
Yeah, no, I'm just getting somewhat confused here, and I'd rather hear it from the CAO. I'm told this is on city property. But when I started listening to the media and all that, they were talking about taking private residences' property and so forth. Maybe you could explain to the public, this Grandview issue is going to come up later on, but is this actually on city property or is it on private property, the proposed project coming up?
Mr. Mayor, as you know, there's a $100,000 walkway project on the options list for council's consideration. And I'll ask Mr. Takama to speak to the property ownership issue.
So last year, I can't remember last year, I asked the engineering department to produce a plan that showed where the road right-of-way existed relative to the ditch and the trees and the fences. And I don't know offhand what the exact dimensions were, but there appeared to be ample room behind the ditch to create a pathway of nominal width. We've talked about whether we would need to replace the fence along the property line, but I mean, my understanding is the road right away is a city property, and in most areas, the sidewalks or pathways are built and put on city property, right? So, could the ditch be filled in? I mean, the ditch serves a purpose along that road. There appears to be plenty of room, in my estimation, behind to build a pathway. So, I mean, we can talk about doing things to alleviate, where the fences are and that sort of thing. But again, there's no final plan that's been drafted. All I've seen is a property plan that shows that there is sufficient room to create a path on city property.
So the proposed plan that we might be looking into tonight is actually on city property?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike, did you want to say anything else?
I just disagree that it's city property. It's just part of the city's roadway allowance. And it's not a fence line, it's a long-term hedgerow that'll be cut down to accommodate it. The ditch is only 2 feet deep. For $100,000, it should be easily culverted and gravelled over to serve the pedestrians who use Grandview Road.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
CEO, any next item?
Mr. Mayor, still with Mr. Takama on Coal Creek and then on to Works Other.
Yeah, so Coal Creek, I think we spoke about that. The Creative Crosswalks project, that really, we were talking about getting the Rotary Arts District, I think, to create or some options for creative crosswalks. That didn't happen for whatever reason early in 2017, and we missed the time frame to do that, and I think it maybe got convoluted with around the rainbow crosswalk that did get done. The solar installation, I don't have too much to speak on that one. I think that's already gone through council earlier this year. The two playground resurfacing are really safety issues at Blair Park and Harbor Key. Those playgrounds need new surfacing to be safe. I think after that we're into McLean Mill. So unless there's questions on works other than
Councillor
parks.
McLennan?
Yeah, you've got those two playgrounds, and I'm curious, 40,000 each from operating. What part of the playground of Blair Park are you looking at? Are you looking at the water features where the water's squirting out and the kids ride their bikes and
No.
skateboards and whatnot?
No, that's not the paved area, that's the actual playground.
It's just the playground itself.
Yeah,
The rubber fatigue matting there for fall.
You're talking about the rubber underneath the slides and
that's
stuff?
correct, yeah.
$40,000.
It's not cheap.
So,
Sounds high, yeah.
Mr. Goodrow, isn't this a situation of safety in terms of what you explained to council last time? There was an issue where, maybe come forward up here. I believe you explained that there was an issue that there was some degrading underneath the current surface?
Yeah, all the top half of the surface that's actually fatigue matting that the kids will crush on is actually showing the skeleton of it, so that's actually worn all off, and the plastic is actually showing, and all the where it joins up, it's all there. So it's going to be an issue where we could have an issue down the right way with our insurance. So
Yeah. Okay. And it's $40,000 to replace it?
roughly with the square footage we have, yes. And we got to make sure when we redo the matting with the full, it's not going to be the piece, it's going to be the fully one piece, which is also a gyro right now, and it worked out really well. It's a little more expensive, but we also got to do our diligence on, we got to have a minimum of 6 feet all the way around of any object, where it used to be only 4, so we got to consider that also into the budget. So we threw in a little bit more for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Allen?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask if that was going to be replaced with the same stuff. It's gyro because you are. Yeah.
Nice
that's
soft.
great.
Yeah.
It's almost trampoline. It's so springy, but it's great. Well, and the other point I was going to make was, it's great that we can replace something because it's worn out, and I hope because lots of people are playing on it. So that's
And
great.
all the playgrounds seem to be in fairly good working condition on both, and they're not going to be expiring anytime soon. If there's something that looks a little fatiguey, we're going to probably put some kind of, plates in there or something so it could be removed and replaced at a later date without ruining the surface that's currently there, or will be there.
Councillor Paulson?
And just is Harbor Key basically in that same category where you've got
Harbor Key's
you've got wear and
actually
tear?
a little bit worse shape than Blair.
Yeah, okay, no, thanks.
Okay, thank you. CEO?
Mr. Mayor, on both those projects, Blair Park and Harbor Key, staff have added those to the draft budget because they're regarded to be safety items. We don't think there's a way around them. Short of taking the park out, that would be the only other option. You'll note that on the options list, there's a spray park option for Blair Park as well. That is not a safety concern, but it's an option.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, under cultural services, we spoke already about the $30,000, $29,900 there from McLean Mill. And if you're ready to go to Parks, Rec, and Heritage, Director Thorpe is here.
I believe so.
Thank you. So I will speak to 3 of the items under Parks, Recreation, and Heritage, and then my colleague Mark Zenko will cover off the rest. So first of all, Aquatic Center Water Bottle Filling Station, that project is complete. So we were able to free up some dollars and some time while we were working on projects in 2017. So that item is complete under Carbon Trust funds. Secondly, under the multiplex ice plant chiller, we've closed the bids on the RFP, or request for proposal stage. So we're currently reviewing bids for that item. And the third item I wanted to speak to is the Recreation Park Revitalization Phase 2. So of course, council committed dollars in 2017 as part of an investment from federal grant funding. So that project as well, we predict to be complete this spring.
Okay.
Questions about those items before I turn it over to Mr. Zinko?
Not from me. Councillor Sauvé.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You just spoke about the ice plant chiller with the RFPs already coming in. Are we in the right budget?
Since we're reviewing them currently, I couldn't speak to it at this stage until we're at a spot of awarding.
Okay, thank you.
City Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And while we're talking to the Director of Parks, Recreation and Heritage, we have a question through Facebook from Rebecca Standley asking, where are we in terms of a new pool? The current one just gets older, and the more money we spend on upkeep renovations seems to be less available for a new one. What about a committee to look into possible funding sources?
That's excellent feedback, and of course a very timely question. So as we've spoken to at recent council meetings, the Alberni Valley Committee had tasked ACRD or regional district staff to talk to City of Port Alberni staff, which we have met, and we have started the process with them. As it's currently in the regional district's court, to be respectful of their processes, we're obviously keen to move forward, but we want to be respectful of the regional district going through their process. I agree with the taxpayer about the idea that we're a 50-year-old facility, and an aquatic facility at the best of times is a tough draw financially. And so I agree wholeheartedly as far as community engagement, and will encourage the regional district who we've asked to take the lead to, and I'm sure they will consider that as well. So we'll ensure we're engaging community. And taxpayer is absolutely right that the older facilities get, the more expensive they are to maintain. Staff has done a terrific job. It's hard to believe when you tour other facilities that our facility is 50 years old, considering the shape it's in. And yes, absolutely, it gets more difficult every year. Every year we move forward trying to upkeep.
And it's young compared to Glenwood Center, but you know, I look and see at some of the things on that list for the aquatic center, new roof, and you know, we want to fix up the top pool, and then we want to do this, and we want to do that, and at some point we get to that point. We get to the point where we say, okay, do we keep putting the money into this, or so? Where are we? I think that's Rebecca's question, which is, where are we at, and how much longer will it be? Essentially, how much longer will it be before we have to make this decision as a whole valley? Do we go this way or do we go this way? Exactly, and like I say, out of respect to the regional district, I'm hesitant to start putting numbers and dates in front of them or speaking on their behalf. And you're absolutely right, Mr. Mayor, that it'll come to the point when we know what that number is. The benefit is that we can say, okay, now we're going to not necessarily look at aesthetics, just look at health and safety measures, because the life expectancy of the pool is X date. And then you'll notice that in those budget processes, those option list items will not necessarily be aesthetic at all. We'll just say, how do we get us to this end of life? And then, of course, dollars being put rather into new infrastructure as opposed to Band-Aids and duct tape to keep us open. Yeah, so there may be other opportunities to fund an aquatic center that necessarily directly involve taxpayers, either from the city or from the region or both. Absolutely. And you know, we need to begin having those conversations with the communities. Mm-hmm. Councillor Paulson.
Just an observation, once again, in respect to the processes for the regional district, but I think we all agree that we're not going to get this project done unless it is a regional project. It can't be all on the City of Port Alberni taxpayers. So just for clarification, if it's a regional project, the city would not be on the hook for 100% of the price tag. We would pay a portion of that, and the regional district would also be paying a portion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah. Operation might be different, but
you got it.
We'd
want a different arrangement. Councillor Sauvé.
Yeah, just keeping in mind that we contribute over 60% for the regional district too. So my main concern is your opinion as we're not at that critical stage right now. So is that your opinion? Because I know you mentioned that last year, but again, you were fairly new in the position, and I hate to, but for right now, we're not in that critical position already.
So as of today, no. The trouble is when you look at life expectancy of aquatic centers, one could argue that we've reached or we've surpassed that functional or end of life stage. The reality is that it's functioning well and everything's going great. You've got two sort of things to contend with anytime you look at an aquatic center, but especially in an aging facility, is number one, the day-to-day, that what if pumps fail, what if motors go down, that you just can't foresee. The crystal ball just does not tell you when something's gonna give way, much like your hot water tank at home is supposed to last X period of time, and one day it's toast. So there's that aspect. The second aspect, which is not necessarily more predictable, but when we look to shut down annually, so every aquatic center or aquatic facility will shut down in any community in Canada, you'll notice that annual shutdown period. And so as the infrastructure ages, so we do take the precautions, and I'm very impressed with Port Alberni that every shutdown, our maintenance supervisor will go and have all of our pumps checked, all of our motors checked, do all of the preventative maintenance we can. And so we literally take apart all the wheels and cogs and ensure that everything is wound properly and all set to go. That said, when you put all the pieces back together, again, with an aging facility, you just never know there's a guarantee. So as you say, Councillor Sauvé, the guarantee that things are gonna go well, the reality is we don't know. So we're doing everything we can. As far as what that magic number is really impossible to say, which is again why we want to get ahead of the curve and push the envelope as much as we can with dates, so that we can say confidently to taxpayers, this is how far our current facility needs to carry us, and then this is what's happening with new infrastructure.
Councillor Paulson? Maybe Mr. Zenko can comment, but and I've been out of touch with the pool for a couple of years, but there was a couple of years where the tank was leaking. And we couldn't figure out where the heck that was going, or have we discovered what that problem was? Is it cured, or have we got a Band-Aid on it? I mean, that's an example of aging structure too, is the water is going somewhere, and for 2 years, I think we didn't have a clue where it was. Like, even through shutdown, we couldn't figure it out. So
Yeah.
maybe you'd like to comment on that, or not.
Where the walls meet the floor, that's a joint, and for years we've been filling that with a pliable material, and at some point that just failed to do the job, and so that's the year that we had the continuous surface leaking problem. So we got an engineer involved, and he said at this point he's not worried about settlement because it's 50 years old. It's pretty much settled as much as it's going to settle. So he said just fill it full of a permanent grout, and so that's what we did, and that seems to have solved the problem.
You got the thumb in the dike.
That's right.
Okay, City Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, while we're still on Parks, Recreation and Heritage, we do have one more email question from Roland Smith. What is the status of the clock tower? It was itemized for repairs upgrades on the 2015, 2016, and 2017 financial plans, but is not itemized on the 2018 financial plan.
CAO.
Mr. Mayor, I'll defer to Mr. Zenko on the physical aspect of that project, but as we mentioned to Council earlier, the city's been working with Sishot First Nation on a potential partnership on bringing value to that project, and that those discussions have caused that project to not move forward yet. But as far as the actual the structural needs, I would defer to Mr. Zenko.
So that's a bit of a two-part project, and the first part was to determine whether what we have there is actually sound, and whether we should take it down and start it fresh, or carry on with what we have there. And so we did complete that, not last year, but the year prior to that, and we found that the structure itself is sound. It does need a facelift though. So some of the grading, or pretty much all of the plate on the different levels needs to come up and get replaced, and I think we'll replace it with the grading so that it kind of improves a bit on the design and allows for water to flow through rather than puddle on there and rust it. rather than just throwing on some fresh grading and a fresh coat of paint, which would do the job. We saw that as an opportunity to work with the First Nations and see if they could maybe add some value to the structure with their particular cultural twist.
Okay, Councillor Sobe?
Mr. Zenko, when will we be able to actually figure out how much money that we would need for that? I guess I know in consultation with our First Nation brothers and sisters, but the thing is, now that you have a better look as into what needs to be done to resurface and so forth, are we able to come up with a dollar amount that it would cost to fix this issue?
Yeah, well, in years past, we've asked for $100,000 to complete all the structural and painting, and I'm confident that we can get that work done within that budget.
Okay, and if I'm right, Mr. CEO, those are already allocated?
That's
money in
correct.
that.
We have that money in hand already.
So that's already allocated. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does that include the clock?
I haven't given up on the old clock yet. Let's put it that way. It is right twice a day. The problem we have with that clock, and we've tried various methods of coming up with the parts that we need to get it to function, and coming up against a brick wall. So,
Is it possible to like put some logos or something on there instead and just
Well,
alleviate the clock itself? If it's-
yeah, and I
if it's a
didn't want to
problem?
jump on.
Just something up there, because you look and you see a clock and you go, I mean, if it was a logo, a city logo or a First Nations logo or something like that, maybe,
Yeah, perhaps we should just take the hands off in the meantime.
This would be like something else, many other things in Port Alberni where you still call it the clock tower, but it's not really a clock tower, it's just a tower.
it's just away from the Orange Bridge, yeah.
Yeah, it's away from the Orange Bridge.
I would
see the Orange Bridge from there.
I would just hate to see sponsors and everything there. We will stick with the artistic value of the clock.
Okay,
Shall we
Mr.
move on,
Senko,
or-
is there, yeah, let's move on here.
Okay, we talked about the, so the curling club ice plant replacement, if you recall, back in June of 2017, I didn't represent, but I spoke to the request from the Alberni Valley Curling Club to support a grant application that they were making, and at that time they asked for $40,000 because they're looking for 50% dollars basically to upgrade their ice plant from the current refrigerant to a more environmentally friendly refrigerant, as well as give the place a boost and increase the lifespan of the ice plant that they have there. So council has committed at that time to $40,000. I have not heard whether they were successful in that grant yet, so perhaps city clerk has heard, but nothing heard yet. So,
Councillor Sobe?
Those funds were allocated subject to a grant being approved, right?
that's correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
if that grant is not approved, then we're under no obligation to supply the $40,000.
Okay. I think it's important, but it's nice to know.
Okay,
The gyro wheelchair ramp and the perimeter drains, I want to group those two together because in 2017, the $35,000 was approved to replace the wheelchair ramp, and the reason we need to replace it is it's getting old and falling apart. But an issue has surfaced while we were doing the renovation phase, and that's some water incursion to the basement. And it quickly became apparent that if we lock the outside perimeter in with a new wheelchair ramp, then we won't be able to get at it to do any repairs. So now is the time to dig up the perimeter drains on the south side of the building, replace those, start fresh, and then lock it in with a wheelchair ramp on top.
okay, thank you. CEO, just to, back to this, are you, what you wanting to do, to go through every single line on this, or are you wanting to do some?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Because we'd be here till midnight if you were gonna go through every single line.
Mr. Mayor, I would our hope is that council would understand what each of these projects are and not need to go beyond that at this point, unless you have specific questions, but we can answer questions as long as council wants to ask them. But at the end of this page here, I would suggest that we not go forward beyond that. After that, I can speak to the water and sewer in general after that, but there's a lot of water and sewer projects that wouldn't be of high interest.
Well, it's not so much that we're not, you know, deeply interested in each one of these items, but there's a limit to how long we can actually sit in one place and
Fair
be
enough.
polite.
I would ask, Mr. Mayor, then, are there any items on the screen right now that council wants to hear more about?
Okay.
Awesome. Then I would,
City Clerk?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just one quick question from Dan Vadamaniak. Where are we at with the Streetlight LED conversion project?
I believe we're finished. Mr. Takama?
Streetlights are done. There are still some parking lots and facilities that could use some upgrades to LED, but we've completed all our streetlight.
But just to clarify, though, we completed the
That's city
streetlights
owned.
that we own.
Yeah.
There are quite a number of streetlights that are owned by BC Hydro that we didn't convert.
Twice as many as we own, yeah.
Twice as many as we own, and some of them are in surprising places. You would look at it and think, oh, that's got to be a city light, but it's not. Councillor Alemany.
Yeah, and that was gonna be my question, is there any indication from BC Hydro that they might be coming through town at some point?
Last I heard, they were still in the process of trying out or piloting a number of different products in Richmond, I think, and haven't heard if they've selected one for the province or are moving forward. Don't know.
It may be that BC Hydro isn't concerned about the cost of electricity.
Maybe not.
Okay, CAO.
Mr. Mayor, the last page that we'll put up on the screen includes a number of projects in water and sewer. And you'll see that all of those are funded not from taxation this year, from various sources, but heavily from the water and sewer fees that users pay. And we can speak to any one of those specific projects if you have questions, but they are often related to projects that we already discussed.
Right.
And you can see at the bottom, a total capital, if we go down a little further, total 2018 capital of $10,480,000. Not insignificant. That's from all sources.
Yeah, so we have, yes, exactly. And then we do have a couple of grants outstanding there that, you know, depending upon what happens with the decision on those grants, it could radically change some of those numbers.
That's correct.
Okay, Councillor Alemany.
Just have one question on that page, and that was the Rainbow Gardens water distribution. I just noticed that it was moved up from 2019. Any explanation or for that?
So, yeah, with the progress that they're showing on their project, there's a couple of dead-end mains in that area that would make sense for us to get at in and around the same time as the construction's going on at Rainbow Gardens. So that's the reasoning for that.
Okay, so we're expecting that project to be initiated relatively soon, are we?
Mr. Smith could probably answer that better.
So our engineering department has been working with their civil engineering consultant, and so their civil engineering consultant needs to provide us a little bit more information before we can finalize our designs, but we're working with their building committee and their consulting engineers on that. So we don't have a final design on their part because we kind of need to know what their demands are and what their project is going to look like finally before we can complete. But we're working hand in hand with their civil engineer.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like it. Let's hope. All right. CAO, that may bring that part to a close.
I believe it does, Mr. Mayor, and back to the agenda.
And I can see that City Clerk has one more question.
Not a question, Mr. Mayor, but it might be an opportune moment just to remind the public how they can submit their feedback to council and questions to council. So through our email, citypa@portalberni.ca, through Facebook, at City of Port Alberni, the Budget 2018 events page, and Twitter at City Port Alberni, or by using hashtag BudgetPA.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, Council, I do believe that completes the number 4 overview of 2018 capital budgets, which then brings us to Part D, the reports. There are really 4 of them that we need to consider. City Clerk?
Just the late item, Mr. Mayor, one from the Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce that we were going to consider at this point. And it's a letter expressing their commitment to take a lead role in addressing big city problems affecting Port Alberni, and proposing that the city invest a minimum of $50,000 to a contract that the Chamber would manage, obligating them to staff the Uptown 3rd Avenue area with a business ambassador.
Okay, thank you. And Council, we have this item in front of us, received it at the end of last week. Any questions, any clarification that Council wishes? Councilor McLennan?
Yeah, I'm curious, and I'd like to hear a bit more what this individual would be doing, and who would be basically supervising, I guess is the word. And how does this fit or not fit with the latest uptick of the citizens on parole? Patrol.
I think I am not going to go there. Councillor Sauvé.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like I said here, I would hate to start facing several duplication here, but what I can report is the fact that number 1, the inspector already announced that the Citizen on Patrol has extended their patrols now for day shift hours in the certain areas where the Rcmp is actually allocating us to deal with the issue, to be their ears and eyes. With that said, done, we are, they are stationed in the upper town where the merchants are. It's been ongoing now already for a week. I appreciate the Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce to contribute, but I would just hate to have a duplication, because I notice roles and responsibilities are almost identical as what is already going on. The only difference is, and out of respect to the Chamber of Commerce, this is a dedicated staff, and the other program is volunteer staff. There's no cost to the taxpayers and so forth. They are there to be eyes and ears of police. Part of their job description is not written, but what they are doing is actually making patrols in the upper town or wherever designated by the police, but they are actually doing the picking up the garbage and cleaning up. I'm not saying they're going to back alleys and cleaning up the messes that are ongoing right now, but anything that's in public view to keep a better appearance for our upper town, that's already been done. There's a report recently that's been sent to the Rcmp as into the progress of this. They are checking in on every merchant in areas that the Rcmp designate for the patrols to be. So everything's already being done. They are dealing with a lot of questions from tourists or even residents as into city issues and helping them out. So to me, it's a bit of a duplication, but the only thing that's different, the project of Citizens on Patrols, which is initiatives from the Rcmp, when it comes to safety issues, it's already been dealt with. They are reporting in and working in with the police on an hourly basis and so forth. So it's already controlled, already scheduled. The only difference, the program would be only a success as how many volunteers participate. I got to report to council that it's in the very early stages right now. It's still in a training stages, but we have been having patrols going on on a daily basis. So I just want to make sure we didn't duplicate something we already have.
I'll share with council, one of my concerns is $800,000 isn't a lot of money, and if we take $50,000 and put it to this, then there's something else that'll fall off. But I also, looking at it, if I were a business person in another part of Port Alberni, I'd be saying, hey, just a second, what about me? So, you know, I appreciate the extra citizens on patrol effort in the uptown portion of our business area.
But this, I noticed that the Chamber covers, you know, to deal with big city problems, which they call it. Again, the Rcmp is taking that initiative, and they are not just designated for certain areas in town, only when it's dedicated by and told by the Rcmp where to go. So it could be anywhere in town, just to mention that.
Okay, thank you. And so I leave it up to, for council consideration. Do you wish to put this $50,000 onto the list for consideration out of the remaining $800,000? Councillor Alemany?
I would put it on the options list just so that we can have a discussion about it later, especially since we're missing a councillor as well.
Okay. Do you want to make that motion?
I will make that motion.
Is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Councillor McClement?
Yeah, just a question now, if we're putting it on an options list, is this just to be considered later, or is this something coming out of the amount that's there? Because I got a real concern of the way we're got the money, and all of a sudden there's a lot of things that aren't optional capital, there's something else and they're coming out of it. I'm wondering if there was some other way, so.
It's, we've got $809,000 uncommitted, so it would be coming out of that $809,000.
So, but this is just going on, and we're not committing to spend it?
We're not committing to spending, it's just under consideration. Any other comment, Council? Okay, then I'll move the motion. All those in favor of putting this on for consideration? Okay, opposed? Carried. All right. Then I believe that takes care of that one. Then council, that city clerk, have we then dealt with the items? I believe we've had the McLean's Mill issue, that was C.6. We've done the C 3.1, so that moves us on to D, reports. So just to set this up a little bit, council, what I'd suggest is that we receive these, each one of these A, B, and C reports, and then, but hold off any motions on it until we get to 4E, which is the council review. Okay? But we can, you know, ask questions and receive each one, but in terms of making motions on them. And the reason I am suggesting that is because if we make motions on this, we're committing part of that $809,000 before we actually get an opportunity to discuss it in the big picture. Okay? So, first one. CAO, under request for early budget approval.
Mr. Mayor, at our last budget meeting, there was some discussion around early approval of additional bylaw resources. And council will recall that discussion originated from a November 1st report around big city problems in the city, and on which we've had considerable discussion and public input. So council asked at the last meeting that staff bring back a report that shows what the actual cost would be in 2018 to begin this, begin staffing up in Bylaw. And given that it would be a partial year, and what the full cost would look like in subsequent years. So if Davina can just scroll down to right there. And council also asked how would we go about doing this. So if council was to give early approval of staffing up in Bylaw as proposed, we would seek to fill these positions in a bit of a blended or staggered way. So we would be able to fill the administrative assistant internally, we think, fairly quickly, We would seek to fill the manager of bylaw services next, and we would hold off somewhat to fill the bylaw enforcement officer piece, waiting for the new manager to be on the ground, so that he or she could be involved in selecting the next bylaw enforcement officer. And we would purchase a vehicle and desks, phones, all the things we need to support staff, and complete some renovations at City Hall to support those staff as quickly as possible. And resulting sharp costs on these is $283,000 in 2018, and ongoing costs of $241 starting in 2019. And of that $283,000 in 2018, $60,000 of that would come from the carbon fund for the electric car. So the taxation burden would be $223,000. And you'll see my recommendations below,
Gotcha.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay. A motion to receive the report?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All those in favor? Carried. City Clerk.
Some comments, there may be some questions from the audience as well, Mr. Mayor, but certainly a couple related to the subject through our social media. So from email, Ruth John, she comments on increasing staff and budgeting for an electric vehicle, asking, are there really that many infractions to justify the expense? We need more money for mental health issues, not more bureaucracy. She goes on to provide comments regarding some of the ugly signage, images of tattoo parlors, pawn shops, and weed dispensaries, as well as the increase in unhygienic, dilapidated, and probably unsafe homes, not just businesses or vacant places and lots that are cropping up everywhere. And I think we probably have another one through email, Lynn Copeland, new to town, been getting to know the community, clear that the community faces many challenges, economic and social, and was disappointed to hear that council is proposing a budget allocation of more than $350,000 to increase bylaw enforcement. Has the electorate given you to understand that this is the best way to spend tax dollars versus, say, improved street lighting, renewal of the city centre, and increased spending on Rcmp to combat serious crime? Is the proposed bylaw enforcement team designed to address this problem? I do feel that bylaw enforcement should be low on the priority list in a community that faces so many pressing issues elsewhere.
Okay, so I certainly would say to Lynn that there's been quite a bit of discussion about this in council. I don't see any need for us to go over it tonight, but there's been lots of discussion in the need, in council meetings for the need for additional bylaw. Councillor Sylvie?
Yeah, when it comes, I don't know if I totally agree with what is being spent there, but you know, there's a lot of issues that the community doesn't understand. Is that are we overwhelmed in issues dealing? The police has a criminal code. The city functions its rules by setting bylaws, and rest assured is that our bylaw officer is getting overwhelmed. How we address that? Hopefully, we could address that by setting up in the budget year and getting that working. With that said, what would result in having an extra bylaw officer and having a manager for this bylaw officer? Right now, we have a separate department head that's actually managing these responsibility of bylaw issues and so forth. And it's taking duties away from that person. And also, there was a few questions that got raised to me about does bylaw officer have to work days or night? Well, right now, all the business is during the days. Obviously, we would need some. We have bylaws that affect the nighttime also, but we don't have the manpower to deal with that. What they don't understand is that emerging bylaw issues are usually, as in noise complaint and so forth, are addressed by the police and becomes a drain on the police. And to have an extra bylaw officer would be an asset to this community. And I know there's an opportunity of having an extra bylaw officer that we'd be able to recoup some, as into business licenses and so forth, and fines, and you know, that we're not actually dealing with right now. When it comes to the uptown you know, bringing up the uptown and making sure it looks property and all that, these are a lot of issues that are happening uptown are bylaw issues also, and those need to be addressed, and it's taken a lot of time for the bylaw to deal with that, so that's why there's a need for it. As for the budget spending, there's a few items that, you know, what is necessary for a bylaw officer. When we come to the vehicle, I'm not sure the lights and all the toys and bells and whistle is totally necessary, but I'll discuss that when we get to that point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alamani?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple questions, just so that I'm clear on process. Are we making this decision today, just as it is a request to come forward, or are we doing this?
We may
another
choose
day?
to make that decision, but I'm suggesting that we leave that until when we get to council review.
Okay.
If we choose to, if we choose to go there.
Okay.
By the time we get to council review, we might say, you know what, we've had enough for tonight, and we can schedule another one of these meetings.
Okay, that's fine. I'm clear with that. My other
Depends what
question.
your staying power is after 3 hours.
Hey, we can just keep on going. Yeah, it's all good. My other question is around the electric vehicle. We've already kind of had a bit of a discussion about that. I would actually ask why the electric vehicle was put in there in the first place. I'm not sure that was.
As council, we had asked that whenever we purchase a new vehicle, that it be considered. That it be considered.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This looks more like it was. Sorry.
Please come ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
My first time doing meetings, so I apologize if I trip over my words or anything like that. My name is Mike Goslin. I guess I've been in the community about 4.5 years.
Okay.
I haven't participated in anything from town council very much until now, but it kind of strikes me as something of this size and magnitude, a scope change from going from one bylaw officer to, you know, truly 3.5 by the time things are done is pretty monumental. So usually you kind of, I don't know, see what the actual need is. I mean, obviously you know there's a need. Your bylaw officer is buried under the workload that is currently there, right? But to justify a second, you know, maybe that would be enough. Maybe you have to do a reshuffling of managers in areas to pick up that workload, or, you know, maybe you work 2 people and they work 2 10-hour shifts so you can run the same vehicle around the clock. I just kind of wanted to throw a couple of these things out here because there's a lot of people my age, I guess, in the kind of the 35 to 45 time frame that seem to be overwhelmed and they don't want to come in and kind of interject their opinions. They seem to be buried in their day-to-day life and not getting this out there. But to me, this is a bit much, right? This is a bit much. I generally try and have a very neutral point or, I guess, response on everything, right to the point where I live on Grandview Road and I didn't even interject when Mr. Cahan was here, right? I would love to see a sidewalk there before one of the kids in the area gets run over, because I truly see it as a real problem. I've had to call the police at least 6 times for people doing burnouts in front of my house on the road, right? So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there just as a viewpoint. I don't really want to debate every issue and stuff like that. I just want to, you know, at work today, I guess it doesn't really apply. I work at the mill, but I mean, this was a big bone of contention at work, and people were saying, like, does nobody have any money sense? Like, what is going on? And I don't think people wanted to actually sit down and dig into the meat and potatoes of it and see, you know, where the money's going and what the real issue was. It was easier to just gripe about it and throw it out there and, you know, be done with it. And they felt they had their little vent session and everything like that. But I think this is a bit excessive, so I'm just going to throw that out there.
So, just out of curiosity, Mike, you said you live on Grandview Road?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Do you live in the city or outside of the city?
I live in the city, so second house on the right-hand side, as soon as you get on Grandview Road. So
Okay.
I'm very familiar with the hedges that are in mention and the ditches that are in mention and everything else.
All right.
So I do see it as an issue. It's to the point where, switching topics a bit here, but I have almost been run over weed eating my grass in my own yard on Grandview Road on at least 6 occasions. So, and that's in my property that I'm almost been hit. It's a little bit ridiculous, right? When people are pushing the envelope there, to say the least.
So then putting a walkway on the opposite side of the road would make no whit of difference to you weed eating in your front yard. Is that what you're telling us?
Other than I'd stop a little bit more frequently so I don't pick anybody off with rocks, yeah. So but I could see getting people off that road is a real issue, right? I don't let my son walk to school, who goes to school at Neil Public School, just around the corner. Because coming around that corner for a 9-year-old, I don't trust it, right? I would rather one of, either my wife or myself will drive him because it's just too risky the way people come around that corner as it is.
Okay, so that means you appreciate the new sidewalk in front of Neil School.
Yes, I do very much.
Okay, well, I certainly attended Neil School as a kid as well, so, and walked home every night and so on and so forth. So, I have some appreciation of what you're talking about. CAO, did you wish to comment on any of this?
Mr. Mayor, I think it's a great point. Ordinarily, as a workload increases, you would staff up by one resource, or you would incrementally increase your resource. In this case, our bylaw enforcement is so far behind the workload, the demand, that I would be kidding you if I let you believe that we could fix it with one more resource. We are so far behind the need that, because we've not been wanting to grow bureaucracy, grow the workforce, that if we want to take this issue on, and this has emerged as I think the #1 issue, we need to get serious about staffing up a bylaw enforcement department that begins to look like the forces you see in other municipalities. And ours is the rarity, it doesn't look like other departments, other municipalities. So I totally get that. This looks like it's a exponential growth in one department. It's because we haven't really had a department. We've had one resource and we've been getting by with that, or trying to get by. The situation has changed. And if you reflect back on the input we heard from the public at our community of the whole meetings, the situation has changed, and it is the #1 issue for many people.
And Mike, if you go over the hump to Parksville, they have 3 bylaw, and they're a smaller community.
Density that 3 bylaw officers in Parksville are servicing.
Well, Parksville has under 15,000 people.
For the whole area that they're.
So they serve under 15,000 and we have almost 18,000.
I don't know. If I was to give advice on it, I would caution. It's very easy to go up in numbers. It's very hard to go back down in numbers when people are now, they need that income and everything like that once they're given that position, right?
Just trying to put it in perspective for you. City Clerk?
Another Facebook question, Mr. Mayor, from Rosalind Chapman. Has there been any consideration made to hiring another assistant to the bylaw officer at a lower salary rather than a full bylaw position? Look for ways to reduce expenses in that department, please.
You mean you have an assistant bylaw officer? Is that what the suggestion is? Or a part-time bylaw? Or what does an assistant to a bylaw mean? I don't really understand it. CAO?
Mr. Mayor, the proposal does include an administrative assistant, which would be a lower pay scale. And the idea being that with administrative assistant support, we could leverage our bylaw officers a lot further. So they wouldn't be doing some of the data entry work. We'd maximize the use of them.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mike. And Kevin, sorry, please come forward. And Councillor Sauvé?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've spoken of this before, but was there ever any consideration, my question to CAO, of having actually a manager that is actually operational to do bylaw enforcement also?
Mr. Mayor, first of all, many of our managers are operational or working managers. We do have a collective agreement, and the collective agreement spells out who can do work and who can't do work in certain jobs. So we couldn't presume to have a manager do the work of bargaining unit employees. Having said that, there is a lot of latitude for a manager to be a working manager, to be supporting and investigating complaints and all that kind of stuff, to take the load off the bylaw enforcement officers. So our intent is that the bylaw enforcement officers would be in the field, engaging with citizens on a regular basis, and that the support staff, both the manager and the administrative assistant, would be serving those bylaw enforcement officers by taking off that administrative load. So they would be assisting, but maybe not in the field writing tickets.
Okay, thank you. Let's just go to Kevin Wright before go back to council.
Hi, Kevin Wright, owner of Steampunk Cafe and the president of the Uptown Merchants Association. I'm representing about 40 merchants at the moment that have convened and talked at length about bylaw. It's one of their biggest concerns in the community. I've been pursuing the bylaw enforcement model and trying to get more proactive models going because I really feel that it's the reactive model that's actually caused most of the problems. Last year I was asked by the city to address looking into the buildings that we had, empty ones and full ones. And one of the recommendations I made at the time also was the fact that we had what I call 10 danger buildings in the uptown core alone, and it's also prevalent in the rest of the community. There's other buildings that have been allowed to deteriorate to a certain point. Those would cost the community a great amount of money in the future if we do not address their lazy landlord aspects of things. The money that we could be seeing is in the millions of dollars if we do not address the concerns we have right now with those existing buildings. There's a building right across from the community, the space here on 4th Avenue that is a fairly notorious building for having serious external issues that are causing safety concerns, and yet they're not being addressed because the bylaw officer doesn't have the time to address those situations. Liability issues with a building that's on Argyle where plaster has been falling off the ceiling onto the pavement below is also an issue, and they're not being addressed. So we could see serious liability issues in the near future as well. I really believe the reason why we're falling into this is because we have the reactive model. We need to have a more proactive model. If we can choose certain areas in town where we are very proactive and return just a standard in the community, then we can use these standards to be reflected to the rest of the community that this is the least we'll accept. In Parksville, that's where I'm from, Parksville-Qualicum area, they have a very stringent bylaw enforcement program, and they levy fines, significant fines, which actually offsets the cost of those bylaw officers. So in the concerns earlier about how a lower population mass is able to maintain that higher level, the enforcement, which would of course go through the administration, if they're able to actually act on the complaint, leave a letter of compliance, then the compliance is not engaged. The administration can then pursue them on a financial means to make sure they can do that while the bylaw officer is able to continue on to his next task and continue enforcing that. I do believe that the administration level is actually very on par with what is required, and I think the uptown merchants especially would think it's important. The liability of those buildings alone could offset the cost, because if the building is allowed to continue to deteriorate, the costs will overwhelm the building owner. Then he would likely allow the building to fall into tax foreclosure. Then we would assume the liability. Then we would have to demolish the building, and we would have to take on that burden. And then we end up at the parking lot instead of a facility. So those are concerns we have to look long term, not just at what we're doing now. If we can dial it up to a certain point, there will be money coming in at a regular basis from delinquent people who are not pursuing their civic duty to take care of their facilities. That's our opinion from uptown, and I'd just like to forward that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Kevin. Councillor Washington, then Councillor
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wright hit it right on the head with the increased fines. There's more money into administration. The other topic I was hit with this afternoon by a passerby was to if we would consider contracting out the manager or the assistant for 1 year just to see how things work out, rather than end up with more bodies. I mean, I promised I might ask, and then, so I'm just bringing that forward to the CAO. Thank you.
All right, are you expecting a response?
Well, I'm sure CAO Ply's got a response, so I'm hoping he can give me something that I can reply to this gentleman with, please.
Mr. Mayor, the collective agreement on the bylaw enforcement officer and the administrative assistant, the collective agreement would dictate that these are seniority-based positions, and we're not in a position to have contracts with unionized employees, not sidebar contracts. We always have the ability to discontinue a position. So if we were to discontinue a position, then those employees would exercise their seniority rights within the bargain unit. On the manager position, that would be a standalone employment agreement, and we would be at liberty at any time to end that employment relationship by the terms in that agreement, the severance that's set out in that agreement. I would caution council that if we enter into employment relationships, or seek to get good employees to come and work for us and tell them we don't plan to have you next year, that we probably would limit the kind of candidates we get. So that's the double-edged sword of that, right? I don't have an answer for you. Could we do it? There's ways we could do it. Is it advisable? I don't know. Do we think this is a one-year solution, or do we think this is a longer-term solution?
I appreciate your answer, because I sort of thought that would be the answer. And like you say, the manager is a position that you could terminate at any time anyway, so that's almost like a contract. But again, I promised I would ask, and I'm glad you had the answer that I thought you would answer with. Thank you.
Councillor Sauvé, and then Councillor Alberni.
Yeah, just in response to Mr. Wright's comments, he painted a dim picture as if the city's not doing anything, but if the CAO could give us some sort of progress report, a lot of these buildings he mentioned that, you know, it's not done overnight, but has been addressed and is currently being addressed. Would I be right to say that?
We are addressing, so just maybe to go back to the reactive versus proactive. We've been reactive in bylaw enforcement, reactive saying that it's complaint driven, and largely because we don't have the resources to be proactive. So we're trying to minimize the work by saying we'll only respond when we're asked to. And we need to be proactive. And council's been asking about what would it take to have a proactive bylaw enforcement function. And this is what it takes, is resources. So in terms of we have a number of buildings that are on our radar that are problem buildings. We don't have the resources right now to action all those buildings at the same time. So we've been taking a methodical approach just lately, dealing with the most problematic building first, and not moving on to the next building on the list until we've got that first building in a condition that we think is safe for the occupants especially, and for the community around it. But we don't have the resources right now to action more than maybe a couple of buildings at a time. And what we've been doing prior to that is really playing whack-a-mole, you know, whack one building and turn to the next one or the next one, and the first one goes bad again. And we are losing the challenge of bylaw enforcement, and we can continue at that level. But my read on the community and what we've been hearing from the citizens, especially at the committee of the whole meeting, is that they want, there's a lot of people who want us to take action on this, and we just don't have the resources to take that action. So yes, we've been moving on some buildings, but there's a long list of them, and we can't get to them all.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two things, just to finish my thought on the electric vehicle. I think we should probably take that asterisk off and you know, be honest with the public that vehicle cost is probably coming out of operating costs. It's not coming out of carbon. It might come out partially from carbon, but I would expect that most of that is going to come out from operational cost. But on the other sort of more general points, I completely agree with Kevin Wright representing the uptown businesses, and not only because of the immediate things that are happening right now, but over the course of the past 4 years, you know, we've heard multiple times in multiple venues, UBCM, AVICC, all of these conferences that we go to and try to learn best practices, and the best practices are proactive bylaw enforcement. So it's not done in a vacuum, and I think we're going to hopefully take steps that will address it in a real way and base that on best practices in other communities. It's a big ticket because, you know, we're hiring potentially 2.5 people, 3 people. So you know, that's gonna be a big ticket for a one-time budget, but it's going to be worth it in the long run.
Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there somewhere we can look or check to see what other cities have for bylaw enforcement? I agree we're sort of behind compared to other communities that I've talked to, like Councillor Alberni says that, you know, UBCM and stuff, where people have 3 and 4 inspectors to R1. But if it's not too much work, can we find out what other cities on the island have got for bylaw enforcement?
We can bring that information back to the next meeting if council likes.
Thank you. Councillor McClement?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not, we seem to be talking about this and we wanted to talk about it later, so I'm not sure if I should be interjecting now or wait, but a couple of things. I think that it's a good concept to be proactive with the bylaw if you can. As far as other communities, Nanaimo, Langford on the island have big bylaw enforcement. They've done some creative things, I think, to help defray their costs, and I've talked about this in the past several months of being ways of collecting money from the work they do so that we can pay that, and I hope that's part of our discussion when we get to it, but if we're going to talk about these other things later, I'll wait.
Okay, Council, as I said about 20 minutes ago, I was hoping we could go through these and receive them. And you did an amazing job. I admired what you did there, Councillor McClement. It would be good to try and get these things before us, review them, receive them, and then make some sense. So if there's some further clarification that we need, Councillor Paulson, is there some clarification you need on one of these?
I just had a comment about overall budget ramifications from this project.
Okay, let's save that. Let's save that to the end.
The only concern I have, Mr. Mayor, is the fact that, you know, the next motion actually states that it's a early budget approval.
Which is why we're not
exactly
why we're not considering it right now. Okay, and let's move on to the Building Security Incentive Program. CEO.
So, Mr. Mayor, similar to the last report, Council requested at the last budget meeting that this be brought forward for consideration for early approval. And so this is another recommendation from the November 1st Big City Problems Report. In a nutshell, it would be a program like the city's facade program that the city would provide an incentive to property owners who would undertake hardening the property or property security projects. So we would work with the Rcmp to determine what those eligible items might be. They may include deadbolts, security cameras, that kind of thing. And there's a couple of good aspects to this. We could include as a criteria that property owners would have to do other certain things to be eligible. So we could use this incentive to get property owners to take further steps to secure their property and their neighborhoods. And also it would result in those property owners spending even more money than the city granted on security. So we could leverage a fair investment in building security or property security in the community. And if we were to do a program like this consistently over a period of years, there's a good chance that it would reduce property crimes in the city. So, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation is $25,000 per year, but that is just a figure that's a figure that council could consider.
So is this all property or only commercial properties?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that it be all properties. It was intended as all properties, but if council wants to specify, they could do that.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. Councillor Sauvé.
Yeah, I just have concerns about all properties because 25,000. I'll tell you, all the first 100 applicants, you know, depending what kind of a incentive you want to send is probably not going to be as successful for the program. So we consider upping the amount of the incentive, or, you know, personally, I would like to start with the businesses as we speak for this incentive. But again, $25,000, I don't know if we consider the cost of video surveillance, even deadbolts, or even changing locks and everything, how much it costs. I'm not saying that we're paying it all of it, but to actually get a good incentive going out there, I'm just not sure if that's the right amount.
Okay, so CAO?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that if council is interested in a program and wants to fund it, that rather than us decide or council decide what the criteria would be or what the eligibility would be, that we work with the Rcmp to find out where the best bang for our buck is, where are the property crimes best attacked, basically. So
Council,
working with the Rcmp.
Let's move receipt of this report first, and then.
I'll make the motion to receive this report, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And then CAO, other items requiring early approval?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So we told you in early January that we would bring one report summarizing all of the items for which staff is seeking early approval. And council will recall that in December, we gave early approval to the multiplex ice chiller project. And there are 2 more projects for which staff would like early approval. Both of these projects are in the draft budget, so they're not on the options list. And the first one is McLean Mill operating grant. As we told you, there's $175,000 currently in the draft budget in 2018 for McLean Mill Society. And they've requested an early approval of $75,000 of those operating funds in order that they can be active in the early part of the year before the budget is approved. And this is common. In recent years, we've given early approval to a portion of that budget.
Yep.
And the second item is the North Park Drive capital project we just talked about. And as you heard, staff would like to be able to begin working on that project earlier than the budget approval. So they're asking for early approval of that.
Okay, council, somebody like to move receipt of the report?
I'll move receive the report, Mr. Mayor.
Seconder?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All in favor? Carried. And it's already in the budget?
That's correct.
Okay, so council, would you like to entertain, since it's already in the budget, early approval on these, or do you want to leave it?
I'd like to make that motion.
You'd like to make the motion for early approval?
Yep, for both items.
Do you want to read it then?
I'd like to move that council for the city of Port Alberni provide early approval of $75,000 from general revenue for the McLean Mill operating grant.
And
That council for the city of Port Alberni provide early approval of $410,000 for the North Park Drive reconstruction project, comprising of $75,000 from general revenue, $135,000 from gas tax fund, and $200,000 from sewer operating reserve.
is there a seconder?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, and discussion, council. All those in favor of the early approval? Carried. Thank you, CAO. And thank you, council. Okay, so council, the first 2 items, A and B, we can come back to in E. Number 2, from the manager of information technology, server versus cloud, Mr. Pellick. Other than Councillor Alberni, I know certainly for me, you will lose me quickly if you get too technical. And so just warning you that you have not a very educated audience when it comes to your explanation, so just keep that in mind.
Yes.
We're technical children.
Yes, and my kids are already in bed, so it's that time of night for all of us probably, hey?
All right.
Yeah. So I won't go into too much technical terms, or at least I'll try not to, depending upon the questions. This report was really written to try to show how big of a discussion this is. So the background on the report comes from the fact that we've been directed to keep our budget at a certain increase. Last year, basically the only way we were able to do that was to not pay into the server IRF, so we were held over from that, which worked out okay because we had bought good technology previously and we were able to make use of that. This year and the next years and so on, that's really the only way that we can keep our budget in line is to, again, pull out the funding. There's not much other option for us because of the recurring annual costs that we pay. So then the question really comes down to what are we going to do with our servers? So right in a nutshell, to get to the heart of it, are cloud servers cheaper than on-premise? No, they are not. You won't find anybody out there that says that they are. In fact, to get into the cloud environment, the upfront costs usually go up. The theory is that over time, the costs go down. But of course, there's a conversion to go into it to replace your technology. So in talking with the people out there that are even in this business, the people that work for the companies like Amazon and Microsoft and TELUS, they have these massive server banks, usually located in 2 spots throughout Canada. A little bit of redundancy if one side of Canada falls into the ocean or something, power outage. They offer some very amazing services. They want money. They know how to make money. They're very good at it. They don't want you to keep your servers on the physical premise. They want your business, and they make money off of it. What other municipalities seem to be doing at this point is a hybrid type environment. The cloud services that Microsoft, Amazon, TELUS, and others offer is very useful. There's a lot of benefits that can come from having your databases, your files, your email, and so on out there someplace else, especially if you live in an area like Port Alberni, where maybe you're going to get your equipment wiped out in a tsunami or earthquake, but you will pay for it. A lot of municipalities, they have gotten into this slowly over the years. They have devoted more money into it, and so they're at a point ahead of us, so to speak. And they are seeing some different things with regards to the cloud that are a bit of a caution, and I mentioned some of them in the report as well. Maybe some of the things that they didn't quite realize up front, but they're realizing afterwards. Some of the things that you may not think about immediately, but if we do happen to have all of our information in the cloud, in Microsoft or in TELUS, whatever, how are our citizens going to feel about that? Legally, we're okay if it's kept in Canada. We're all right. But that might not change public perception. Maybe it's not an issue. I myself, I've had a Google Gmail account for years, and I store things in there that, you know, it's whatever, the government can see it, I don't care. But not everybody might feel that way. So honestly, when it comes down to it, a lot of the research, a lot of the questions really end up asking for more time to be spent on this issue. It's not something I'm asking council to really decide tonight to go absolutely full on ahead. I'm basically saying, let's go ahead this year, let's keep the money out of the budget to keep our budget in line. Let's hold off again from paying into this fund, and let me go out and spend more time and come back with more reports, more cost analysis, and see if it truly makes sense for us to continue down this road. Or maybe in next year's budget, next year's financial plan, maybe we should decide, you know what, those reports in those other municipalities, they tell us we should be putting money back into it. But that's really what it comes down to, is my recommendation. Let's keep the money out for now. We're okay. We've got warranty on all of our equipment. This is a 5-6 year plan anyways to look ahead, and let's see what else we can come up with.
Okay, Councillor Sylvie? I'm sorry, yes.
I'll make the motion to receive the report first of all, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
If you get a second.
all in favor? Carried, okay.
And I just want to add that I truly appreciate your comments and all that, and how it may affect or not affect the budget. I think your recommendations are very prudent, because in these days when it comes to technology, something always comes up new, and I would hate for us to miss that boat. So having you do more research is a smart thing to do. So I'm prepared to read the recommendation, the motion, Mr. Mayor, but if there's any other questions.
There's another question, and we need to vote. Councillor McClellan.
Yeah, I guess we don't really want to be needing to debate it right now because it is a bit out in the future, but I think some things we have to consider is what happens if the cloud goes down. It's something that I've often thought about, because I got stuff and some of my things are up in some cloud somewhere. I'm not sure whose it is, but it's a cloud. And that is one thing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I think we should look at, if we're going to make a big change, a big movement in our IT department, I think we should look at the whole picture. And Jeff has already referred to some municipalities are going hybrid, some are going all out and then just I don't know if it's contracting with other servers outside and then they have their own workers inside. I'm not 100% sure how it works, but I do know that lots are doing that or have been in the past. So I think we should look at the way we're going to go and make sure that's what we want to do before we do spend the money.
Okay, Councillor Alberni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Pellick, for the report. I completely agree as far as, you know, putting all your eggs in one basket is never a good idea either way. So in IT, it's really common to have, you know, even just as simple as a backup, to have a backup on in a site somewhere far away from wherever it is that your main system is. I agree with your recommendation that you know, more information needs to come back to be able to make that decision to make such a drastic change in how we host our own services. But I have a feeling what we might end up with is like you said, a hybrid, because there are advantages to, and you know, cloud is a new term and it's sort of the term, but really all we're talking about is contracting out a service or not contracting out a service, and that's something that's been happening for a long time. So there might be instances where that makes sense from a backup or from a efficient service point of view. But like you said, I think it's good for us to go along the route of getting some more information before we make a big change.
Okay, so we've voted on the motion to receive. And Councillor Sobey, do you want to make the second part of the motion?
The second, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to direct staff to bring back a report during the year with detailed cost options and service implications in order to support council in making a decision to either add the server to the ERRF contributions back into the budget beginning in 2019, or to increase operating costs to fund cloud servers beginning in 2023.
That's it.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
So who craft? It's okay. On the motion then, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
That one was a little wordy, sorry about that.
It was. It's okay. Thank you. From the Director of Finance, the capital expenditure policy. We have a report, council dated January 24th, providing us with information on capital expenditure policy and how it applies to capital purchases. Council, questions from this report? Director Rothwell, are there critical things that you want to absolutely make sure not just that council understands, but that people at home understand?
Some years ago, in 2009, the tangible capital assets policy was, excuse me, was developed to comply with reporting requirements, to comply with auditing standards. And the city had set up what it considers a capital item, the threshold for the cost, whether it's a betterment for a building or part of a component. There's various examples. I didn't put the whole policy in here because it's about 20 pages, but I put in the definitions and the thresholds, and that gives you kind of a cheat sheet to look at it. There was a concern about how do we know if it's capital, how do we know if it's not? And we've got these guidelines that you can look at now, say, okay, well, that fits within it. Or there may be an accounting reason why we wouldn't capitalize something, or why we would if it wasn't up to the threshold. It just depends on what the item is in a lot of cases. But this is the general rule that we use.
Okay, so it says in appendices A and B of the policy are attached in for to provide definitions and useful lives and dollar thresholds of the various classes of tangible capital assets. So I imagine, you know, just like at home, we have capital assets that are still functioning quite fine. They might have been, they might not technically be worth anything, but we still use them. So are we in that situation as a city where we have capital assets that are elder statesmen, shall we say, but we still continue to use them? Or once they get to that that amortization and they're zero, we just automatically get rid of them?
No, we don't, because we have a lot of assets that have been fully depreciated that are still fully functional. That'll be part of the asset management plan, is to reassess the useful lives of a lot of the tangible capital assets that we have, and then reestablish the book value, and then continue the amortization.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Council? Councillor Alberni?
Just a question around insurance, because I didn't see it mentioned. I admit I didn't go through the entire document, but the cheat sheet is amazing. But the as far as insurance, does the maximum life relate to whether we can insure something or not, or does that come into it at all as far as?
No, insurance uses their own rule of depreciation on the assets. They also look at replacement value. Our insurance worksheet is about another 25 pages long. It goes into a lot of detail about the types of buildings and the liabilities and exposures.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Alberni, do you want to move receipt of that report?
I'll move receipt of the report.
Seconder?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. And then we have also from the Director of Finance, supplemental projects funded from general revenues. So we have the report dated 25th, providing clarification on general revenue funding capital expenditures versus non-capital expenditures. And I believe this was probably in response to a question earlier?
Yes, that's right. To see which of the supplementary projects were actually completed in 2017 and which ones were not.
Okay, so it says that the $708,000 was the number that was reported out, but then there's an additional $253,000. Are those projects that were approved in 2017 but haven't been done yet?
Okay, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead to the late item.
Oh, it was just the summary of supplemental projects funded
Yes,
from
that's
general-
right.
Okay.
That's attached to my report, and I do apologize for that.
Yeah, okay, so that 253,000, those were approved, but we haven't had an opportunity to get them done yet?
No, these ones, this is just a summary of the supplemental projects. No, I didn't say whether these ones were completed or not. The late item is where they were completed or not. It's two separate things. This one just shows what capital projects are funded from taxation money.
Okay.
From the supplemental list and the regular capital projects list from the 5-year plan.
But surely the $708,000 doesn't represent 100% of the capital projects that we did in 2017?
No, this was only what was funded from general revenue, which is property tax, basically property taxes.
Okay. Any estimate in terms of the total value of the capital projects in 2017?
Just give me a minute and I'll have it for you. Oh, it's not on this one. It'll be on the previous capital projects list, or the 2017 to 2021.
Oh, I see.
Financial
Okay.
plan. Yeah,
Okay.
because I hide the rows of the previous year, so we keep
Yeah.
the number of pages down.
Okay. But definitely more than 708,000.
Yes, this was only funded from general revenue. There was a lot of money that was funded from water and sewer, gas tax, grant money.
Which would be in the millions.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Council, any further questions on this? Councillor Alberni?
Just on that point, is that the 10.4 million or so? I think that's on page 38. On the last question.
Sorry, say that one more time, Councillor Alberni?
On page 38. 2018 capital projects. The total 2018 capital is 10,480,275.
Oh, yeah, that's for this year, right? Yeah. So I'm assuming, or maybe I'm assuming incorrectly, but that's why I say 2017 must have been in the millions as well.
Yeah, our capital projects just without big grant monies or special ones tend to run to $3 to $4 million.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you. Someone like to move a receipt of that report?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Mayor, that the report from the Director of Finance dated January 25th, 2018 be received.
Seconder?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Director Rothwell. So Council, that brings us then to the Council review. And I've said it a couple times before, it doesn't take very many projects for us to commit the $809,000. So I don't know if Council's ready to make those suggestions now, but this would be an opportunity for Council to make those suggestions, or make those motions now. Councillor McClement?
Mr. Mayor, it's just about your 3 hours you talked about a while back.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we have any legislated things we have to pass motions to keep going, but I would like to make a motion that we defer this to another meeting held within the next 2 weeks so that we can have time to think about it and think about it with a clearer mind than when we're tired.
Okay, our next scheduled meeting is February the 19th.
I know, but I think that should be sooner than that, so my motion is to have one sooner.
Oh,
And
I
I have a
see.
seconder. I'll ask the city clerk if we can do that.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any discussion? Because I'm going to make a request of Council for February the 5th, so, but that's just personal.
Wait till I check what day that is.
Does it have to be, City Clerk, does it have to be on a Monday or a Tuesday?
No, it doesn't, Mr. Mayor. It can be whenever all of council is available.
Okay.
And we can schedule it in the calendars.
Okay, thank you. Then on the motion, all those in favor? Sorry.
And the
One more
motion's
time.
happening within the next week or
Are we talking within the next week or within 2
week
weeks?
or two within,
Okay.
for this.
Okay, so,
What I
again,
said.
sorry, I didn't see everybody. On the motion, all those in favor? Carried. And that brings Council, I have a special request of Council, and I need to get Council's permission. I have the opportunity on Monday the 5th and Tuesday the 6th to go to Ottawa, and that's to present in front of, as a support in front of a parliamentary committee on the use, on procurement and small and medium enterprises, and the Colson Group has been asked to present in front of this committee, and I've been asked to go along to provide some support for that. And it's also an opportunity for me then to establish some meetings related to the PATH project and to some assist for Department of National Defense. So since would be going anyway, it set those meetings up and make it worthwhile. So just to clarify once again, Council, what I'm asking for is permission to go. So it's not seen as a conflict, but it won't be transportation costs for the city. However, it would be cost related to accommodation and food. So it's my motion to seek Council's approval.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right. Then,
Short at the end of the year. Be careful.
Mr. Mayor?
all right. Then Councillor Sobe?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you would allow me to make one small motion for an amendment to the 5-year plan. In light of the information that we have a better understanding now tonight when it's relating to the surplus that the police have been having for years and where the money goes and actually where the money is coming from, that I have a better understanding, and I'm sure Council does also, where and why where the surplus came from and the necessity to ensure that we keep the proper mandate for the police as into how many officers are there. I wanted to put notice to council that in the 2018-2022 draft financial plan, it actually has a scheduled reduction of one RCMP position in 2019 budget, which is equivalent to 173,747. I would just like to put a motion forward that we remove that request and from the financial plan, and that we keep it as status quo for the police.
Okay, is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, under discussion then, Councillor McClement?
Yeah, I think this should be discussed at the next budget meeting in the next week or two with the rest of it. Myself.
So are you opposing the motion, or are you in favor of the motion?
I really haven't thought about it, and it's $174,000, and no, I'd like to get some time for debate and put it off until that date. But if council wants to vote on it, go for it.
There is, just to respond, sorry, Councillor Alberni, but it isn't critical that we make that decision tonight. When it comes to the 2019 budget, we could actually put it in at some point later in the year. We don't actually have to do it tonight. Council can ask to revisit the budget at any time.
I'll stand by my motion, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Alberni?
Yeah, I'll same as Councilor McClement. I'm not speaking against the idea, but the motion I think we can probably put off to another date and have all of council here and have a more fulsome discussion about it. There's no rush to it, so.
Okay. Any other comment? Councillor Sobe?
No, I understand about how they feel there's no rush, but any implication to the 2019 budget may have an implication to the 2018, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. And there's a lot of talk about, you know, where's the surplus coming from, and we're overtaxing our taxpayers, which is seriously not the case. So it's just a message I'm trying to send, especially with the current events in our social events in the community.
Okay, Councillor McClement?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we table this motion to the next budget meeting. And if I
Okay.
have a seconder, I won't explain it because I can't debate a motion to table.
I'll second that.
All right, so then, there we go. We don't vote on that motion, am I correct? Oh, okay. Okay. On the motion to table, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so that motion is off till the 19th. Thank you. Then that brings us the next item, the next budget meeting, thank you, yes. Motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second? All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody.